You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
An all-new season of The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives is now streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney+.
Mom Talk has just been blowing up.
Whitney and Jen are on Dancing with the Stars.
Taylor is a bachelorette.
Saying that out loud is crazy. Like, that is huge.
But all the cool opportunities could pull us apart.
It's causing issues in everyone's marriage.
My whole world is falling apart right now. It's chaos.
Watch the Hulu original series, The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, now streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney Plus for bundle subscribers. Terms apply.
Refreshing wild cherry cola meets smooth cream. The treat you deserve. Pepsi Wild Cherry and Cream. Treat yourself.
Hi, this is Jenny.
And Jen.
We've had an influx of new listeners lately who found us through Spotify featuring our episode, Would You Survive Pompeii? A Choose Your Own Adventure. Welcome, new listeners. We are so glad you're here.
We're dropping some all-in-one-place episodes this month that give you great entryways into long arcs we've done about the Roman Empire and the Roman Republic. Because, believe it or not, ladies think about the Roman Empire and the Roman Republic all the time. It's not just a dude thing. And maybe what we're thinking about is different than what the dudes are thinking about. Just a thought. Last week, we dropped 2 episodes in our series on Julius Caesar.
This week, we're re-releasing the first 3 episodes of our Spartacus series, telling the story of Spartacus's rise, the conditions in Italy that allowed that rise, and how he defeated Roman bosses of increasing levels before the Romans finally got serious about defeating him and sent Crassus, which nobody asked for. They were not sending their best.
Nobody asked for more Crassus.
Nobody ever asks for more Crassus.
These episodes are 3 of a 4-part series. You'll have to go back into our back catalog to get the ending. But if you really want to get into Spartacus, if you really want to know his story, you have to go all the way back to the beginning of this season that we did about him. It starts with Dionysus. Have you heard the good news about me?
And this is where Jen's absolutely unassailable obsession with Dionysus comes from, right here. Most people don't realize that Spartacus had a girlfriend, by the way, a priestess of Dionysus who used the god to fuel his rebellion, build up his legend, and attract followers. We go into Dionysus in depth and talk about his role as a god of rebellions, underdogs, and the enslaved in ancient Rome.
And then we talk about the First and Second Servile Wars, because there were 2 other Spartacuses? Before the one we know.
They weren't both called Spartacus?
They were not called Spartacus. That was not their name, and they also weren't Thracian.
Neither was Spartacus, arguably.
But yes, there were 2 other massive slave rebellions before Spartacus's rebellion, which is called the Third Servile War. Surprising. And we go in depth into those other servile wars. We also talk about the Thracians, because in theory, Spartacus allegedly was a Thracian.
But he might not have been, and we talk about that question as well.
Exactly. We talk about how to train a gladiator and what it was like to attend the gladiatorial games. So by the time you get to our 4 episodes on the actual Spartacus and his revolt, you'll know a great deal about the time period and the conditions that led up to his epic war with the Roman Republic.
We hope you enjoy this little rabbit hole and it inspires you to dig a little deeper. Enjoy!
The Italian peninsula was a pot waiting to boil over. Dionysus comes to you in your dreams. He has always been with you. From childhood, you felt his presence. You have never been alone. Even when your mother died, when your father went off to fight in Mithridates' wars, you knew your God was with you. You could feel him in your bones. When they took you from your temple, they thought they could take Dionysus from you. They thought that your God lived only in the stone halls of his sanctuary. But they were wrong. He is everywhere, and he is always with you. You had never been further than the river at the bottom of your village's mountains, never seen the sea before. Now you have seen enough of the sea, enough of the unbroken flat sky to last you for years. When you met him, your handsome gladiator, you weren't sure Dionysus would approve. You prayed to Dionysus to give you a sign. You waited for what felt like ages, and then the dreams began. Dionysus has always spoken to you through snakes, sacred, beautiful conduits between the worlds. In your dreams, you see the future. You see the blood, the death, and you wake up afraid because there is so much darkness, and your gladiator comforts you. His arms are strong and sure. In the ludus, this school of gladiators, of rough men, he is gentle. You did not expect to care for him, but you do. He is a dangerous man, a man who dreams of home, of Thrace, of the mountains you both grew up in. He is a man who wants more, and who isn't afraid to take it. You beg him to have patience, to wait for a sign. The other men in the ludus won't follow him. The risks are too great. The rebellion he speaks of carries too high a price. But if he can just wait a few more days, you'll have your sign, and you'll make them follow him. Because when Dionysus speaks, everyone will listen. Everyone knows Dionysus. They might know him by a different name, but everyone knows Dionysus. Everyone will follow his orders when your god finally gives you a sign. And when he does, when you see the snake curled up by your lover's head, you know exactly what to tell the others. You have the words that will unite them all, the words that will begin a revolution. I'm Spartacus.
No, I'm Spartacus.
No, I'm Spartacus.
We're both Spartacus, and this is Ancient History Fangirl.
All right, we finally got here.
You know what? We decided to celebrate this point in the day. It's brunch time for me.
It's about 6 o'clock for me.
Booze o'clock for both of us, basically. So we both brought an entire bottle of Prosecco to this party.
The rest of our entire day is going to depend on how much of this Prosecco we consume. So good luck to us.
Yes, wish us luck, everyone. Godspeed to Ancient History Fangirl.
So today we're celebrating because we're finally, after an entire season, getting to sink our teeth into the story of Spartacus and his rebellion against the Roman Republic.
To be clear, this is after 3 episodes on Dionysus, 2 episodes on the Thracians, 2 episodes on the First and Second Servile Wars, 1 episode on Spartacus and popular culture,
and 2 episodes on gladiators.
That's right. So this is what it took to get to the story of Spartacus.
And we hope that you guys have enjoyed what we've given you to lay this groundwork, because we do think it's all important. And if you don't, and you're just joining us here because you see Spartacus in the title, hello!
Well, hello. You have a lot of binging to do to catch up. That's all.
And that's great, because we're a podcast that comes out every 2 weeks. So in between, you can go listen. To say, Jenny, that I have been counting down this day since we started writing and recording this season is a massive understatement. Since I was a kid, I've been enamored with the story of Spartacus. I've always loved stories of revolution. And Spartacus's rebellion has everything. Love, betrayal, pirates, victory against impossible odds, kicking upper-class Roman asses, redistribution of wealth. I mean, I don't want to tell you the ending.
But the story of Spartacus is so much more than an epic legend. It's the story of the Roman Republic at a crossroads. In order to understand why Spartacus was so successful and how his rebellion worked, we have to understand what was happening in Rome, Thrace, and the ancient Mediterranean world that allowed a hero to rise. Rome in the 70s BC was a dangerous place to be. The Italian peninsula had been ravaged by the civil wars, the Sulla and Marius Wars, just over a decade ago. But just before the civil wars, there was the social war, and this war changed the landscape of the Roman world.
The social war, which lasted from 91 to 88 BC, destabilized the Italian peninsula. It's easy to picture the Italian peninsula during this time as a place just occupied by Romans, but that's not actually true. Italy was a place filled with diverse tribes of people. The Etruscans were one, others included the Sardinians, the Rutuli, the Ligures, the Sicani, the Corsi from Corsica, the Samnites, and many, many others. Some were far more ancient than the Romans, and a few spoke languages that had been in Italy long before the spread of Indo-European languages like Latin. As Rome grew and expanded, it conquered its neighbors, and by 91 BC, the non-Roman Italian tribes had been allied to Rome and fighting alongside the Romans for about 200 years. They paid Roman taxes, and their men died in Roman wars, but they had not been granted full rights as Roman citizens. And this did not go over well, because the Italian tribes wanted a piece of that sweet, sweet democracy they'd been hearing so much about. But the Romans did not want to share, shocker. They did not want their allies and neighbors to have a vote in Rome or the equality that allegedly came along with citizenship.
This led to a deadly war that lasted 3 years and devastated the Italian countryside. Rome won the war and wound up granting the Italian tribes citizenship anyway, but this was not a victory for the Italian tribes. Their lands and cultures and people had been decimated. So many people were killed among so many Italian tribes that their cultural presence on the island was vastly reduced, and a uniform Roman language and culture rapidly spread throughout the peninsula, replacing ancient tribal cultures, languages, and loyalties.
In short, the Italian tribes got their vote, but they lost so much, their own people and their own identity. And because this was a civil war, the mess from the two armies marching across Italy and warring left vast scars on the land. Over 100,000 died in the social war, and their loss was keenly felt.
How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Tap the banner or visit usaa.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
Gold Bond knows that every glow up starts with radiant skin. So choose Gold Bond Cocoa Butter Glow for a body lotion that's clinically shown to give you smooth, glowing skin. But don't just take our word for it. 88% of people who tried Gold Bond Cocoa Butter Glow saw glowing skin in just 1 day. Gold Bond Cocoa Butter Glow. Nourish your skin. Reveal your glow. Buy now on Amazon.
Walmart Business saves you time, money, and hassle, which means you can focus on what really matters. Like putting the money you save back into what you do. Spending more time training your team, filling orders, and finding new clients. Anything and everything, right down to, oh, that's the one, choosing the best hold music. Walmart Business. It's the Walmart you love, now for your business. Learn more at business.walmart.com.
After the Social War, Rome experienced another period of deep unrest. This time, it was in the form of the Civil Wars, or the Marius versus Sulla grudge match. We talked a lot about the Civil Wars, which lasted from 80 to 81 BC in our Julius Caesar series. So here we're just going to hit the highlights.
So the Civil Wars started pretty much immediately after the Social Wars ended. Marius and Sulla were two Roman generals. Sulla started out as a protege of Marius and developed a grudge because Marius didn't give him enough credit for his victories. And this is a vast oversimplification. We're just giving you the bare bones of what you need to know. In the end, after 2 wars and almost a decade, Marius's faction lost, and Sulla took control of Rome with an iron fist. He wiped out the democratic system entirely and became a dictator, and then he enacted a series of bloody proscriptions where people he didn't like or who had taken Marius's side in the civil wars found their land, wives, and wealth being redistributed to Sulla's friends. And shortly after that, they would die because Sulla had this list of people that he wanted to see murdered, and if you went out and murdered someone on that list and brought Sulla the head of that person as proof, you got to keep your victim's stuff. So a lot of people did this. And the city of Rome itself and the Italian peninsula were racked with violence, and these bloody proscriptions gave rise to a new period of uncertainty and terror.
After the Civil Wars, Roman aristocrats on the winning side went on a land grab in the countryside, which had been depopulated by all this war. They bought up land and formed latifundias, industrial-level agricultural estates that produced inconceivable wealth for their mostly absent owners. Any small family farms that remained couldn't compete with this new way of working, and they began losing their farms. Many had no choice but to sell their farms and land to the aristocracy, probably for a lot less than they were worth, and this left the farmers impoverished and homeless. Some farmers were allowed to stay and work the land they used to own for their new wealthy landlords, in a situation that kind of feels a little bit like tenant farming.
So this fueled a massive wealth gap in the Republic. Small landowners lost everything and fell into debt, poverty, and enslavement because remember, one of the things that could happen to you in ancient Rome, if you couldn't pay off your debts, you would have to sell maybe your family and then maybe yourself into slavery. Many impoverished farmers who'd lost all their land and everything they had streamed into the city of Rome. There was a grain dole in the city of Rome. You know, the mindset is at least they would be fed, but It meant the city of Rome was flooded with impoverished, disaffected farmers with a chip on their shoulder, and many joined up with populist politicians who enforced their agendas through mob intimidation. Clodius, looking at you.
Our girl Fulvia, queen of the street gangs.
Right.
Obviously, they're a bit later in the story, but, the stage is being set for them.
That's right. It didn't come out of nowhere. This dynamic was fueling violence in the streets of Rome and a massive wealth gap. And meanwhile, the fearsome Roman latifundium machine, already in existence for hundreds of years on Sicily and in the provinces, began to metastasize in the heart of the Italian countryside itself. We discussed this system in our episodes in the first 2 Servile Wars, so go back and listen to those if you want all the gory details.
So Sulla began redistributing all this newly available land in the Italian peninsula that had suddenly been emptied out because of war and proscription.
One of the other things that was happening at this time to empty out the Italian countryside was that able-bodied men were being conscripted into the army at very large rates as well.
And in the next few paragraphs, you're going to see where they were going and why they were being conscripted. So at this time, Sulla handed out land to his rich friends, and his rich friends found themselves in need of workers. It could take as many as 30,000 enslaved people to run a latifundia. The entire Italian peninsula consisted of 6 million people around this time, and about 2 million, or 1/3 of these people, were enslaved.
That's 1 in 3. That's the same ratio we saw on Sicily during the First and Second Servile Wars.
Mm-hmm. So, according to Appian, quote, the rich used persuasion or force to buy or seize property which adjoined their own, or any other small holdings belonging to poor men, and came to operate great ranches instead of single farms. They employed slave hands and shepherds on these estates to avoid having freemen dragged off the land to serve in the army. And they derived great profit from this form of ownership too, as the slaves had many children with no liability to military service, and their numbers increased freely. For these reasons, the powerful were becoming extremely rich, and the number of slaves in the country was reaching large proportions, while the Italian people were suffering from depopulation and a shortage of men, worn down as they were by poverty and taxes and military service. And if they had any respite from these tribulations, they had no employment, because the land was owned by the rich who used slave farm workers instead of free men.
Okay, so let's break this down for a second.
So, number 1, we've got this problem of the rich now own all the land. They are not interested, Jenny, in employing freedmen.
Let's be clear, they are not interested in paying any of their workers. They want you to work on their farm without being paid. That's what they want. That's the offer on the table.
No, they're not, number 1, they're not interested in paying any of their workers. But number 2, if they were interested in a form of labor where they gave you some kind of payment, which they're not, they have a problem, which is that freedmen can be conscripted by the Roman military.
So free men, there's also a term freedman, which is a person who is freed from enslavement, but who doesn't enjoy all of the benefits of citizenship. And this changes throughout the history of Rome. So it's a little complicated saying who has what privileges when. But freedmen, let's assume these were poor men who were not enslaved.
These wealthy landowners, these slave owners, they were not interested in paying any kind of wage because their workers could be taken away from them at any point in time to fight in the wars that were raging in Rome. Not just in Rome. We're going to get to the wars next. So this is a massive problem because there is no work for the Italian people who are able to work for wages. So they now have to stream into cities. They're forming a massive refugee problem. And the countryside has now gone from being, a place where you could own land and have a farm and make a living to these large-scale latifundias, these large-scale plantations that rely on the labor of enslaved people.
The aristocracy won't hire you, number 1, because they're cheap as fuck. Number 2, because if they hire free people to work on their farms, those people could be called into conscription at any time, whereas enslaved people are not subject to conscription.
Yeah. So you're getting a picture of what the countryside looked like and what was happening, because everything right now was absolutely awful for everyone unless you were the aristocracy. But only if you're a friend of Sulla.
Right. If you're not a friend of Sulla, your head might be hanging in the rostra, or you're going to have to give up your wife and lose all your shit. That, best case scenario. So, God!
I mean, still better than it is for everyone else.
This is just a fucking crap sack world, Jen.
It really is. Everything about the system that we're talking about has long-reaching effects into our present day.
Yes. And I just want to pull something else out of that quote here, Jen. Did you notice how Appian mentioned shepherds?
He did. And do you remember what it was about shepherds that we learned during the Servile Wars?
Before we entered the crapsack reality of the Servile Wars, when I pictured shepherds, I guess I pictured like nursery rhymes and Little Bo Peep and lambs frolicking in the grass with butterflies everywhere.
What I always pictured, Jenny, was like the biblical image of shepherds who were watching their flocks at night. All the Christmas songs talk about how the shepherds were watching their flocks at night.
It's so peaceful. It's so idyllic.
So peaceful. And if you grew up religious, your school might have had a Christmas pageant. It's possible one of your brothers, both of my brothers, were shepherds and they had to wear the bathrobe and the whole outfit with the crook. So, I mean, that's kind of the image.
So nice they got a bathrobe.
They did. But anyway, that's the image that I always had as a kid, was like shepherds were peaceful. And, you know, there's a lot of Christian iconography that comes with shepherds. And we're going to spoil that for you right now.
We're going to give you the gritty reality of shepherds here, okay? We met the shepherds during the First and Second Servile Wars. They were a giant problem on Sicily, where latifundia owners basically didn't give their enslaved shepherds clothes or food or any basic necessities. They did give them, like, weapons, or maybe they just were expected to fashion their own weapons out of things they found in the forest. I don't know. Anyway, they just basically turned them out in the mountainsides to tend to the flocks and told them, you know, if they wanted food, if they wanted clothes, if they wanted basic necessities, they could just take them from local travelers or the community. So the shepherds on Sicily became armed gangs of bandits who roved the countryside, robbing and enacting violence. So basically in Sicily, you couldn't go anywhere without a lot of armed guards. Like, it really wasn't safe to be in the countryside, in the woods. The shepherds were robbing people, not just on the roads, but in poorer communities that didn't have walls or more isolated farmsteads. Like, you were really vulnerable to shepherd-based violence in Sicily around the time of the First and Second Servile Wars, especially if you didn't live in a walled town or have enough money to have, like, a security force. So, anyway, by the time of the Third Servile War, which is the Spartacus War, the shepherds were starting to be a problem not just in Sicily, but in the Italian countryside, making life even worse for any family farmers who were trying desperately to hang on to their land.
So between the poverty and violence in the countryside and the city, the massive wealth gap, widespread enslavement, and civil unrest, the Italian peninsula was a pot waiting to boil over. But internal problems weren't the only problems Rome was dealing with at this time. Spartacus's rebellion came at a time when Rome was dealing with wars on almost every front in the Mediterranean. After the civil wars, a Roman general named Sertorius found himself on the wrong side of the new administration. He had sided with the Marian faction, managed to personally piss off Sulla during the civil wars, and also managed to piss off the populist government that took hold after Marius died, but before Sulla took over as dictator for life.
Sertorius managed to piss off everybody personally. That's the kind of guy he was.
Oh, man after my own heart.
He wasn't very tactful, let's say. So through various hijinks, which we're not going to go over in this episode, but which probably merit their own mini-sode because they're fascinating, Sertorius got his non-tactful ass sent to Spain as a pro-praetor, or an ex-praetor, who still had permission to have control of an army, I guess. And that was a mistake because Sertorius decided he was going to build up his power base in Spain and then challenge Rome as the sole inheritor of true Marian ideals.
Sounds about right.
So the story of Sertorius, like we said, is a fascinating one in which there are magic deer.
There is a magic white deer sacred to Artemis. Sertorius gets his own people who believe in him. He's got his divine sign.
The deified Sertorius, if you will.
Yeah, he's got a divine mandate, which you know how those go.
All of them did this. I mean, Eunice did it, Spartacus did it, Sertorius did it. They've all got a god that they answer to, which is why people follow them.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, if you want us to do this episode, let us know on the Twitters and the Instagrams. Just let us know.
Magic deer, you guys.
Magic deer.
But essentially, his actions destabilized Roman rule in Spain. He was a giant trash fire. Another war broke out. Sertorius had an army. He had the support of some of the tribes in Spain and northern Africa. And he sometimes had the help of Cilician pirates, but sometimes not, because those Cilician pirates were tricksy devils.
They were. They had their own agenda.
They were your ally as long as you were paying them the most out of everyone paying them.
Look, they gotta eat.
Right, Cilician pirates got a Cilician pirate, Jen.
To be honest, guys, the Cilician pirates were real assholes.
So, from 80 to 73 BC, he led a rebellion against Rome in Spain, northern Africa, and across the Mediterranean. He was a problem that Rome urgently had to deal with. And then there were those Cilician pirates. Have we mentioned the pirates? So we've talked about the Cilician pirates several times before on the podcast, including in the very first minisode we ever did, which is Pompey and the Pirates. But this is another story where they become critical players. The Cilician pirates ravaged the Mediterranean during the late Republic, and they were kind of a necessary evil to the Romans, because they helped fuel the slave trade, capturing merchant ships at sea, selling most people on the boats into slavery, and if they happened to have, an aristocrat on the boat, they would ransom that guy off to whoever will pay the most for him. This was a problem that both irritated the Romans and fed the latifundia machine, so they kind of wanted to keep it going.
Yeah, because, have we mentioned that the ancient world is the worst?
I seem to remember that we have mentioned that, Jen.
Oh, good. I wanted to make sure that, we weren't letting people think that it was, this bastion of democracy where everything good came from.
Or, just a place where shepherds frolicked in the fields and shit.
Had this lovely pastoral image.
Right, forget it. It's a
No.
crap sack world.
It's awful. So the Cilician pirates plundered and looted seaside communities and took people into bondage. And as long as they were able to supply the ancient Roman latifundia machine with slaves and kept their attacks on land, mostly away from Italian shores, the peninsula, then the Romans essentially allowed them to get on with things because supply and demand and the worst.
It started to be a problem when the Cilician pirates started mocking the Roman aristocracy, and I'm not joking about that. It was the mocking, really.
It really was. That is what it was. There were a few times that Rome made some attempts to fix the pirate problem. But these didn't really work. It wouldn't be until 66 BC, when Pompey was charged with eradicating the pirate problem in the Mediterranean, that their campaigns of terror would come to a sort of end. And this takes place after the Spartacus rebellion, and it actually took Pompey just 1 month to do this.
You just have to give Pompey credit here. Dude gets shit done.
There's a reason he was named the Teenage Butcher.
He wasn't a teenager when this happened. He was in his 30s, but he had been General Ing since his teenagerhood, and he was referred to as the Teenage Butcher. Great times.
Great times. So, at this point in our story, the city of Rome is a powder keg. The Italian peninsula is racked with starvation and slavery and shepherd-based violence because, gotta hand it to the shepherds, they know how to bring the violence.
Because apparently that's a thing.
Sertorius is burning shit down in Spain and elsewhere, and the Mediterranean is crawling with pirates. Surely that's enough problems for one republic, right, Jenny?
No, that's really just the background.
Yeah, because here's the thing. While all this was going on, Mithridates of Pontus declared war on Rome.
So the Mithridatic Wars started in 88 BC, right at the end of the Social Wars and the beginning of the Civil Wars. This was going on at the beginning of the Civil Wars, so it was going on at the same time.
And there were several wars, but we're kind of condensing it into the simplest possible way to understand it.
Right. They raged on and off for 25 years. Until 63 BC, and we don't have to go into too much detail here, but we do need to know a few things because to understand who Spartacus was and how he was able to lead his rebellion, we have to understand the political climate around him. You have to understand the waters in which he swam. And the climax of that political climate was the Mithridatic Wars. So Mithridates IV, also known as Mithridates Eupator Dionysus, which was a name he gave himself.
Also known as the Poison King. Check out Adrian Mayer's incredible book about Mithridates.
That's right. So this dude would be known as one of ancient Rome's most effective and intractable enemies. He was the king of Pontus and Anatolia, altogether a region on the southeastern shore of the Black Sea, around where Turkey is today. And Mithridates' kingdom was not part of Rome at this point. It was independent, but Rome had a presence nearby, and at first, Mithridates was pretty friendly with Rome.
The trouble started when Mithridates had a border dispute with one of his neighbors, the kingdom of Bithynia. Rome had troops in the area because it was protecting, quote-unquote, the interests of the nearby Republic of Rhodes, one of their allies.
Occupying, maybe.
Exactly. So Mithridates and the king of Bithynia asked the Roman Senate to decide their border dispute. And Rome sided with Bithynia, and Mithridates, who had been an ally of the Romans, he was okay with the decision. I mean, he was kind of cool with it. He asked
a non-biased third party to decide the dispute, and they decided in favor of his enemy, and he was like, all right, cool, I'm just going to abide by that. Because Mithridates is a reasonable guy, okay?
And then the Roman soldiers did something that is just totally baffling, and I don't understand it. Apparently, the Senate had no control over their soldiers in the field. And the officers took one look at Pontus and the riches of Anatolia and thought, hey, we could just go ahead and plunder that, right?
Well, the Senate said, no, you cannot, absolutely under no conditions do you plunder. They had sat these guys down and said, look, no plunder. That's the rule.
Yeah, but...
Put it out of your mind? Forget it.
But here's the thing. You're back in Rome. I see the gold. I want to go for it.
Stop thinking about the plunder. Stop it.
But plunder.
Nope. We are not in favor of plunder. Stop it.
But I want shiny, shiny plunder.
Bad soldiers. Bad.
Well, you're not here. You're not my real dad.
You're not my real dad. I mean, that's basically how it went, right? They decided that the Senate was not their real dad, and...
No hardships to step-parents. We don't know why they decided this.
The Senate had said that the soldiers were really only allowed to attack Pontus if Mithridates decided to wage war on Bithynia. Mithridates was being super annoying, and he was not even twitching in that direction. He had zero interest in making war on Bithynia. So the officers and soldiers, they really wanted a war. They really wanted to get to plunder because they wanted Pontus's stuff. So they instigated Bithynia to raid Pontus and maybe give Mithridates a little encouragement, shall we say. And Mithridates took that bait because he had to defend himself, and as you can imagine, this escalated into the First Mithridatic War, which lasted from 88 to 85 BC. And this is a vast oversimplification because this is our podcast, and that's what we do. We vastly oversimplify. So anyway, Mithridates had a lot of allies, and he hired a lot of mercenaries in his war, and one of those was the Magi, a Thracian tribe that may have actually been Spartacus's tribe. They sided with Mithridates, fought against the Romans, and went on to loot the oracles of Dodona and Delphi in Greece during the First Mithridatic War because they are Thracians and that is what they do. As you can imagine, the looting of these sacred oracles was a huge affront to the Greeks and the Romans, and a certain Roman dictator, Sulla, wanted revenge. During the Second Mithridatic War, which we are not including the reasons why Mithridates did a second one, but just imagine that he's still mad.
He's still mad. This is still a grudge match.
Mithridates is still mad. So now there's a Second Mithridatic War, which lasted from 83 to 81 BC. So during that time, Sulla ravaged the land of the Magi in revenge for what they did to the oracles. And we know very little about what happened here, except that the Magi's lands were destroyed by the Romans in retaliation, and that's basically all we know.
That's all we know. It's like literally a one-line quote.
But we can make some qualified guesses.
We're going to make some assumptions and conjecture.
We're going to write some very, very informed fan fiction right now.
Historical fiction. It's not even fan fiction, it's historical fiction.
Historical fan fiction, right.
I mean, sure. So we can assume that many of the Magi were taken into slavery, including their warriors, men like Spartacus. And we know that once the Romans restored Roman order, the Magi were loyal to Rome. That's now the company line. We are loyal to Rome, and that is it. So this probably means that the Romans installed someone friendly to them to rule the Magi and do whatever the fuck the Romans told him to do.
That was a thing they did a lot.
They did this a lot when they had rebellion, particularly in Thrace. I'm sure this happened in other places, but obviously my research at this point in time has been in Thrace.
Well, it happened in Gaul, it happened in Britain, like it happened in places where there were tribal enemies of Rome. Once they conquered a tribe, what they would frequently do is install their own guy, or maybe someone from, a neighboring tribe, or someone from the same culture who was loyal to them to rule that tribe.
Exactly. And that's what happened here. So during the Third Mithridatic War, which happened from 75 to 63 BC.
So this is the Third Mithridatic War. So imagine, Mithridates is really still mad.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why this happened. And when Jenny writes that epic arc on Mithridates and you get to realize what a cool badass he was, you'll know why. He was mad.
When Jen writes the arc about Mithridates, and we talk about all the poisoning, it'll be amazing.
So anyway, this war started just 2 years before Spartacus's rebellion. And the Magi this time fought on the side of the Romans. They were included in the Roman auxiliaries and fought alongside the Roman legions. The ancient sources tell us that Spartacus was part of the Roman auxiliaries. Probably, we can assume, fighting against Mithridates, although we don't know that for sure. If this was the case, the Magi would have definitely rankled at the thought of fighting their old allies. They would have also been unhappy to fight alongside their long-standing enemies, the Romans, who had ravaged their land just 6 years ago.
It had not been a long time.
No, these are still really fresh wounds.
And even for hardened mercenaries and warriors like the Thracians, fighting as an auxiliary was no easy task. Auxiliary soldiers were tribal allies or, a lot of the time recently conquered people fighting in the Roman army with their own equipment and according to their own customs and following their own tribal leaders, but under Roman orders. And they were often given the tasks that nobody else wanted to do. Sometimes this might mean guarding the camps or forts, but often what it meant was serving on the front line of battle. They were basically cannon fodder.
Yeah, or ballista fodder.
There were not cannons back then, but you know what we mean. Auxiliary soldiers were sent into battle first ahead of the Roman legions and often faced huge losses. Even skilled warriors like the Madai and other Thracian tribes were not immune to this. This happened to Alaric of the Visigoths, remember? This is why he invaded Rome. This was, the slight that spurred that, because when he was fighting the Battle of Frigidus on the side of Stilicho, he was sent in basically as cannon fodder and lost half of his force because of that and felt that he had been really mistreated.
Yeah, well, he had been.
Right. Auxiliaries also were paid about a third of what a legionary was paid, even though their jobs were more dangerous. Auxiliaries also were not Roman citizens, so they had none of the rights or protections that their legionary counterparts had. In short, being an auxiliary sucked. Being a Madai auxiliary, fighting against people who you sided with in the previous war and fighting on the side of people who had fucked over your land and probably killed a bunch of your family 6 years ago, had to really, really suck.
At this point in time, the Madai's unit would have been commanded by a respected leader from their tribe, potentially someone like Spartacus. This leader would interface with both the Madai troops and the Roman commanders. He would be someone everyone trusted, someone who is able to keep the auxiliary together. Again, my fanfiction head says Spartacus. There's no evidence of this.
Yeah, we have no idea if that was true, but we like to believe it.
It makes a better story, doesn't it? But there's absolutely no evidence that's the case. Serving in the Roman army in any capacity wasn't for the faint of heart, because the Romans took military service very seriously. There were terrible punishments meted out for even the smallest infractions. Fall asleep on the job, death. And not just death, it was generally a death by either being beaten or stoned to death by your own unit. And the point of that was that if you fell asleep on your watch, you would be beaten or stoned to death by your own unit because your sleeping on the job could have cost them their lives. So desertion, actually leaving your post, unsurprisingly also carried a very heavy penalty. Jenny, can you guess what that would be?
Was it death?
It was death. The ancient sources tell us that Spartacus deserted his post. Why did he do this? We don't know. But we do know that Spartacus would have been aware that deserting his post would result in a death sentence if he was caught. We also know that an honor-bound Thracian would probably have to have a good reason for leaving his post. That's the hope.
I mean, it's a little confusing because if he did leave his post, why would he have been sold into slavery and not just killed?
I don't know.
There's so much we don't know, and the source that we have is Plutarch.
The source we're using right now is Plutarch, who's working off of Sallust's account of the Spartacus War. There's a great book of primary sources by Brent D. Shaw called Spartacus and the Slave Wars. The book is only about maybe 200 pages total. 160 pages are about the first two Servile Wars. About 20 pages are actually about Spartacus's war, and that's being generous. The rest of it is all just where it's been cited, because there just isn't a lot of information.
We have 10 paragraphs in Plutarch, and he leaves a lot out, and he's writing 150 years later, and he's working off this account from Sallust, which was contemporary to the time, but Sallust's account has been lost to history. So there's a lot of gaps that you can't fill in because probably Sallust told you more about it. Plutarch has a lot of inconsistencies and just weird stuff where you're like, wait, how did that work? We don't know. Plutarch was high the whole time he was writing. That's our theory.
You like that flying ointment. I think the point here is that there are a lot of gaps, and it's one of the many reasons why Spartacus in history and in legend and folklore continues to endure, because there's a lot of stuff we don't know, so we can kind of put these ideas onto him.
Right, so we can conjecture all kinds of things, but the truth is, this part of his story is lost to history. We don't know so much. Spartacus might have had a very good reason to leave his post, something that the Romans maybe wouldn't want to glorify so much, and that's why they left it out. All we know for sure is that Spartacus probably served in the auxiliary, if you believe Plutarch, and for some reason he deserted, maybe. I mean, I don't know, Jen. Let's fanfiction this a little bit. What are some options? Maybe he just didn't get along with his commanding officers and peaced out, because fuck those guys.
Maybe he grew tired of fighting against the people that he'd sided with in the last war, or fighting for the people who had ravaged his tribe's ancestral lands. That's a thing.
Maybe he was tired of plundering innocent towns, although probably not, because he was a Thracian and that was kind of their thing.
Yeah, that kind of was.
Yeah, so we don't even know if he really deserted. It's possible his unit was disbanded after suffering heavy casualties. If your unit suffered heavy casualties in the ancient Roman world, then you might be punished for poor performance. All of the surviving soldiers could be stripped of their honors, and it's possible something similar might have happened to Spartacus's unit.
And I think the thing to stress here is poor performance. If your commanding officers felt like you performed poorly, and that's why you had such terrible casualties, they would do this to you. I don't think they would do this if just like the odds were definitely not in your favor and you performed as well as you possibly could.
I mean, we could sit here and make up stories about Spartacus all day.
So it's also possible that Spartacus never deserted. He served out his time and was taken into slavery afterwards. The sources are so vague, so the conjecture is just endless. So these were the problems plaguing Rome around the time Spartacus was taken into enslavement. 2 major wars, both with highly experienced generals and seasoned armies. A pirate fleet that raided and plundered wherever they could and could be bribed to side with Rome's enemies. And massive inequality, poverty, violence, and unrest at home. So Rome had a lot on its plate during the early 70s BC. I mean, understatement?
I think that might be the understatement of the episode.
Most of the experienced generals and legions had been sent to Spain and Pontus to deal with the armies of Mithridates and Sertorius. These armies were often harassed by pirates who were making a killing, selling people into enslavement and just being general pirates. And regular people, caught in the crossfire of these warring armies, were being taken into enslavement at a record rate. The world was a shit show. It was into this tire fire that Spartacus found himself being taken into enslavement.
This has turned very grimdark, this whole podcast.
Guys, can you see? This is where I've been for so long. I have spent most of quarantine just in this place. It's why I have literally bought like 30 plants and turned my living room into a garden.
Jen had to balance out the grimdark in her life. So, let's turn our attention, shall we, to the region that the Romans called Thrace. The place Spartacus was theoretically from, maybe. We don't know, but we think. As we've said many times, Thrace was not one country. It was a geographic area around, vaguely Eastern Europe-ish, made up of about 200 tribes, many of whom did not get along with each other. And the Thracian territory was sandwiched in the middle of Rome's 2 wars at this time. They were right between Sertorius on the west and Mithridates in the east. Some of the Thracian tribes sided with Mithridates and were waging guerrilla-style battles with their neighbors. Some of the Thracians were allied, either willingly or unwillingly, with the Romans, and when they were allied with the Romans, that meant they had to pay crushing taxes and send their men to fight in Roman wars. The entire region was in turmoil. And during this turmoil, it was hard for many of the tribes to make a living and keep up with the Roman levies that were being enforced on them. Sure, many of the Thracians were experienced fighters who were able to secure wealth via plunder and war, but they weren't always able to send that wealth back to their tribes. Because, it didn't go very far, and also there wasn't mail back then. So how are you going to get it, across all these battlefields and front lines to your tribe back home? We don't know.
And auxiliary soldiers were paid a third of Roman legionnaires' wages. So the pay they were able to send back to their families wasn't enough to keep on top of the rising debt. And we mentioned this before. The reason that Thrace had so much wealth was they were able to do a lot of mining, and they were able to have these artisans because they had these warriors who could keep their borders safe. But these warriors were now not there anymore. So the lands were kind of open in a way they hadn't been before. Things were getting dire in some parts of Thrace. Some Thracian tribes, particularly the Getae, sold their children into slavery, sometimes for as little as the cost of an amphora of wine. Life was cheap and hard. Women and non-combatants who had remained in Thrace faced pressure on all sides. And I want to pause here and introduce you to one of the most crucial and forgotten people of Spartacus's rebellion, the Thracian lady. She has no name because why would she?
Because we don't need to know women's names. Women are not important, Jen.
They are not, but they should be.
We're in the ancient world. That's what the ancient Roman writers frequently thought. We don't have a chip on our shoulder about this. It's fine.
It's fine. I mean, other people will tell you the story of Spartacus, and they might make her a love interest, and they might make her a very small part, but she was there at the beginning, and she was there at the end, so she gets to be mentioned.
I feel like I've seen a lot of Spartacus-themed media and stories. Frequently, I would say pretty much all the time, he does have a love interest, but I've never seen them use the Thracian lady specifically. I think the closest that I've ever seen is the Stars series, where she goes into slavery, but she's not in the ludus with him, and she's kind of maybe generally has a connection to the gods, but she's not specifically identified as a priestess of Dionysus in that series.
Exactly. So Plutarch is the only ancient source who mentions the Thracian lady. It's possible she is also in the lost passages of Sallust, but we'll never know. The Thracian lady was the consort or possibly the wife of Spartacus. As a priestess of Dionysus, she would have had certain privileges. The Thracian people set a lot of stock in the prophecies of their oracles and priestesses, and they revered women's religious authority. As we talked about earlier this season, Dionysus was one of the patron gods of Thrace, and priestesses were respected and well treated.
It's not clear if she met Spartacus at the ludus or the gladiatorial school where Spartacus trained, or if she was married to him before and taken into enslavement with him. Plutarch says that she was from the same tribe as Spartacus, and that they were in the ludus together. And I don't think, I guess it depends how the passage is translated. Like, there is not much about her in Plutarch. And I imagine there was more in Sallust if he was getting it from there. And there's a lot of gaps. I don't know. I think if they were enslaved together, it's extremely unlikely that they would have gone to the same place, because the ancient Romans were not particularly concerned with keeping families together when they were enslaved.
This is true. There is an interesting thing here that I didn't mention. It was rare that gladiators had wives and children, but it wasn't as uncommon as you'd think, because wives and children were another way for Lanistas to actually control their gladiators. If you were a gladiator and you had a family that you cared about, a Lanista wouldn't see that as a negative, because now you have a wife and children who are leverage, and they can keep you loyal to your ludus and to them, because you don't want any harm to befall your wife and children.
We don't know if this woman was already in the ludus or had been brought in at a different time, but happened to be from Spartacus' same region. I imagine they wouldn't have a lot of freedom to pick people. Like, the ludus might have given a woman to a gladiator to keep him loyal and bind him even more firmly to the ludus, is what I'm assuming, as opposed to just letting them make their own relationships. I don't 100% know, but they were assholes, so I would imagine that it would be something like that.
Yeah, it's possible they made their own relationship, and Spartacus was such a good fighter that the owner of the ludus was like, great, why don't you two live together and be married? Great, I like this. Now I have a chip I can use against you.
Step out of line, and we'll sell your wife and children into slavery.
Well, not into slavery, we'll sell them to somebody else.
Or we'll give them to a different gladiator, because that's one of the horrible things that they might have done. So like I said, yeah, it's unclear if she met Spartacus at the ludus or gladiatorial school where Spartacus trained, or if she was married to him before or taken into enslavement with him, although we find this pretty unlikely. It's a lot more likely that the Thracian lady was someone Spartacus met in his ludus, a woman he came to care for and who came to see the potential in him, because together they fomented a rebellion that would make Rome quake. So we don't know what Sallust said about the Thracian lady, or if Plutarch just invented her because everybody who reinvents Spartacus has to give him a love interest. But we at Ancient History Fangirl are going to go right out on a limb and say that the Thracian lady was a real person who'd been erased from history, and the fact that these two people came together and found each other would go on to change the course of the Roman Republic.
Listen, I'm going to go ahead and believe this, because why not?
We might as well believe this if you believe anything else about the Spartacus story.
Ninja One understands that IT teams today are stretched thin, trying to manage too many disconnected tools. So they built a platform that brings them all together. Ninja One unifies endpoint management, autonomous patching, backup, and remote access into a single intelligent platform. That means fewer tools, lower costs, higher efficiency, and a team that has the bandwidth and confidence to stay ahead. Unify IT to simplify work with Ninja One. Learn more at ninjaone.com.
This episode is brought to you by Cologuard. Do you know what's really scary? Not screening for colon cancer when you turn 45. The Cologuard test is non-invasive, requires no special prep or time off work, and ships right to your door. In just 3 simple steps, Cologuard takes the scare out of colon cancer screening. If you're 45 or older and at average risk, ask your healthcare provider about the Cologuard test. Cologuard is available by prescription only. Learn more or request a prescription today at Cologuard.com/screen.
Kraft Mac and Cheese is better than 90s hip-hop. We'll remind you of your childhood without making you feel incredibly old. Kraft mac and cheese. Best thing ever.
So, once Spartacus was taken into slavery, he was brought to Capua. Capua was in the Campania, an area of southern Italy that had been particularly hard hit by the social and civil wars and the land redistribution that followed. Of the 1/3 of people who were enslaved on the Italian peninsula at this time, a lot of them were in Campania. It was a fertile ground for insurrection. It just needed the right leader. Spartacus was sold to a ludus, or a gladiator school, owned by Lentulus Batiatus. We do not know much about Lentulus Batiatus. We just know that that was his name and that he owned the ludus. Spartacus was, according to Plutarch, quote, a Thracian from the nomadic tribes, and not only had a great spirit and great physical strength, but was, much more than one would expect from his condition, most intelligent and cultured, being more like a Greek than a Thracian. It's like he just came out and said he was articulate here. Fucking asshole.
It's like just casual racism, and thank you, Plutarch, for making everything that you recorded just put through that lens.
Thanks, Plutarch, for the casual racism.
So, prejudices aside, it was these qualities that made Spartacus a great gladiator. He was intelligent. He probably spoke Latin and some form of Thracian tribal language. Maybe more than one, I don't know. Spartacus was experienced in battle and he was strong, probably over 6 foot. Thracians were physically much bigger than Romans.
The Romans were kind of weenies.
And it's probably safe to say Spartacus was a looker because Lanistae didn't find men to be gladiators who weren't hot enough to inflame the crowds. I mean, occasionally they did and just put a helmet on them, but you know. So Spartacus was accustomed to the harsh life in the Thracian mountains. He was familiar with war, and very shortly after he arrived at the ludus, he met a woman who, as we've said, would change his world. Spartacus arrived at Batiatus's ludus and met his fellow gladiators. And this is really important. Most of the gladiators at Batiatus's ludus would have been from many different tribes. Lanistae were very careful not to have too many gladiators from the same tribes. This was because they were terrified that the gladiators would cling to their tribal loyalties above their loyalties to their ludus and be impossible to control. As we discussed in How to Train Your Gladiator, part of the process of training a gladiator involved some light, in quotation marks, brainwashing.
Just a touch of brainwashing.
It was full-on brainwashing. This was a cult. I've had enough wine to clearly say this was a cult, and what they were doing was breaking down people and making them loyal to their cult. So in order to have a gladiator who was loyal to your ludus or cult, you had to break them down and remove their tribal loyalties and identities and force them to accept their status as a trained warrior and killer loyal only to you and your school. I mean, cult. You're in a cult, call your dad. Yes, my favorite murder, we love you. You had to mold a disparate group of people, possibly people who had been ancestral enemies on the outside, into a brotherhood of men who valued their fellow brothers above all else.
When Spartacus met his fellow gladiators, they were from a variety of backgrounds and tribes. There would have been gladiators from Gallic, Celtic, German, Syrian, Scythian, and North African tribes, and a lot of people in Spartacus's group would have been non-white. Even the Thracians themselves, there was a stereotype about how they were red-haired and blue-eyed in the ancient world, but the Thracian territory was so extremely diverse that I don't think it's likely that all the Thracians were white either.
I completely agree. I think the really important thing when people think about Spartacus's rebellion is they think about it as being sort of this homogenous rebellion. It was not.
It was not. It would have been racially and ethnically and culturally diverse. And one of the things that I have been thinking about lately was I don't think I've ever seen Spartacus portrayed by a non-white actor.
He could have been non-white. I mean, the evidence that we see here for the reason he may be portrayed as white or Mediterranean is that Plutarch line of he was more like a Greek than a Thracian. But we don't actually know.
We talked about this in the Thracian episodes, right? Their territory bordered on Scythian territory. It bordered on Middle Eastern territory. Spartacus could have been non-white.
We don't know. We see back through generations that Thracians had red hair and blue eyes. We see them first mentioned in the Iliad that way. Does that mean that's how they looked? No, the land was so vast, we don't know. So there could be a great adaptation of Spartacus waiting to be made where Spartacus is non-white, and history would back you up.
So anyway, when Spartacus met his fellow gladiators, they were from a variety of backgrounds and tribes. there would have been gladiators from Gallic, Celtic, German, Syrian, Scythian, and North African tribes. It would have been a very diverse group, and many of these people would have deep-seated tribal rivalries with each other. They might not have spoken all the same language. They would have been very unlikely to get along outside of the ludus. We think that many of these tribes had a strong dislike of Thracians. There was a stereotype about Thracians being brash and unruly and prone to outbursts and hard to control. And part of me thinks that this stereotype actually dates from the time of Spartacus. So I don't know if it would have been in place before his rebellion, because I feel like the older stereotype is the one about the Thracians being lazy. And again, that was a Roman stereotype, not necessarily one that the Celts or Germans or Gauls would have had. So we don't know if the tribes actually disliked the Thracians.
We don't know. We do know that all of these different tribes and people had very strong opinions of how they saw the world. And sometimes these opinions were based on tribal divides. Remember, Thrace was huge.
Two Thracians from different tribes in the same ludus might hate each other.
Yeah, but also Gauls who interacted with one tribe of Thracian might feel very differently about Spartacus's tribe of Thracians. We don't know. And it's a thing that the Romans exploited.
Inside the ludus, all of these tribes, these disparate tribes, were brothers in arms because that's how the brainwashing worked. And it was this very system that was the undoing for Batiatus, because inside the walls of Batiatus's ludus, these men became a family. And as a family, they were able to do the impossible by working together. They were able to escape their ludus and wage war across the Roman countryside. But how did he do it, Jen? How did he do it? How did Spartacus manage to get so many different people to his cause?
He did it with sex.
Spartacus had the help of his Thracian lady. She was a priestess of Dionysus. And Dionysus...
Orgies.
Dionysus was the god of orgies. And he was a god that many of the enslaved people knew in one format or another.
That's right. Dionysus was a wandering god whose legend had crossed paths with lots of different religions and cultures. He was worshipped in one format or another across the ancient world, from India to Northern Europe. Dionysus, as we mentioned earlier in the series, was the god of wine, which, literally Jenny and I are behind right now.
The god of Prosecco and wine and sparkling wine and champagne.
He was the god of orgies and religious ecstasies, and he was the god of the underdog, of the enslaved people and revolutionaries. So Mithridates in Pontus, who at the time was currently rebelling against Rome, still rebelling, minted coins, which pictured himself as Dionysus. He also took Dionysus as his patron god. That was such a calculated move. Rome had already had problems with Dionysus on the Italian peninsula. The worship of Dionysus had been outlawed by the Senate over 100 years ago by now for fear of what had happened at these Dionysian rites. Rites that were run by women!
Oh no, women are in charge!
And these rites allowed women to have control over the minds of impressionable young men.
Oh, we can't have that.
Oh, heavens to Dionysus!
I clutch my pearls in horror.
Rites where freedmen, slaves, women, and aristocratic young men all gathered and did who knows what. But my bet is on orgies, because that's always the answer.
The answer to all your questions is orgies.
And also possibly changing wills and plotting to redistribute wealth and overthrow the social order. But let's be honest, a wash first and then orgies.
Codus says wash your junk.
My husband surprised me with a necklace with Dionysus on it. It's an ancient Roman coin necklace, and it's actually this coin. It's Mithridates of Pontus as Dionysus.
So, Spartacus's Thracian lady used her collateral as a priestess of Dionysus to create his legend. According to Plutarch, quote, "They say that when he was first taken to Rome to be sold, a snake was seen coiled round his head while he was asleep, and his wife, who came from the same tribe and was a prophetess subject to possession by the frenzy of the god of ecstasy Dionysus, declared that this sign meant that he would have a great and terrible power, which would end in misfortune. This woman shared in his escape and was then living with him." So this is basically the extent of the entire Plutarch quote about her, isn't it, Jen?
I think that's probably about it, but historians have extrapolated quite a lot from this. I'm not sure if she appears later on when they talk about the unification of people. All of Plutarch talking about Spartacus is like 3 pages.
The reason we talked about Dionysus so much is because the Thracian lady was a priestess of Dionysus, and we want to know what that was like.
And what we found was that actually a lot of people followed Dionysus because he was the religion of enslaved people and the lower classes. It was actually a worthwhile journey to go on. And Dionysus was so widespread across the ancient world that it was really, really important that we understand that.
Yeah, because this would have been a god that had a unique ability to unite all of these disparate people in this ludus. Not every god could do that. So the Thracian lady worked her magic. She linked her man Spartacus with Dionysus, and we imagine her, because we are also extrapolating, we imagine her telling every enslaved person in the ludus who would listen that Spartacus was destined for great and terrible things. He was blessed by the gods. He was going to do something wonderful. He was the kind of person who could end their misfortune and bring holy fire down upon their Roman oppressors. With her at his side, Spartacus had something that no one else in the ludus had, a direct line to the gods and a holy mission. It would have been easier for him to convince his fellow enslaved people and gladiators to follow him if he could convince them that he had a god on his side. And he had a cunning and clever and lots of moving parts plan that was absolutely fail-safe that was going to see them all to freedom, right, Jen?
In theory. So sometime in the summer of 73 BC, Spartacus decided it was time to get the fuck out of Dodge.
Get the fuck out of this ludus.
We don't exactly know what brought this plan on, why he decided that now was the time. In the Gladiators, A Day at the Games, which was our last episode that you listened to, we posit in our historical fiction way that it could have been a terrible contradiction that Spartacus witnessed amongst enslaved people who were killed for the enjoyment of the crowds. But the ancient sources do not give us a reason for why Spartacus decided that the summer of 73 was the right time to revolt, so we're just making shit up. And we know that there was all kinds of unrest in Rome. It's possible he just saw his moment and took it. We can assume that Spartacus knew of other people warring against Rome during this time period, like Mithridates. He probably would have had a clear idea that many of Rome's forces were tied up fighting that war to the east, and that this was a particularly good time to plot an escape and insurrection. But the ancient sources don't tell us this. They're not interested in these facts. It's also possible that the Thracian lady had a sign from Dionysus that predicted that this moment right now was the right time to rebel.
So whatever the reason, this is how their escape went, according to Plutarch, who, bear in mind, was probably very high when he wrote this. Quote, 200 of them, gladiators, planned to escape. Remember, Spartacus had this very elaborate, foolproof plan, but their plan was betrayed, and only 78 who realized this managed to act in time and get away, armed with choppers and spits, which they seized from some cookhouse. I don't know why it's worded like that.
I love how they're like, there was many cookhouses, but this is just one of them.
Some cookhouse. I don't know. On the road, they came across some wagons which were carrying arms for gladiators to another city, and they took the arms for their own use. So it's important to remember that the punishment for enslaved people who killed their masters. We depicted this in our episode A Day at the Gladiatorial Games, and we've also talked about it a lot in other episodes. Enslaved people who slew their masters didn't just risk their own lives if they were caught. They risked the life of every slave in the household, usually, because a lot of them were punished as a group. They might all be crucified together.
They might be scourged, they might be whipped. There could be any number of punishments enacted on these people.
Anyway, so you can see why Spartacus's plan was betrayed, because if they were caught, they might risk the life of every enslaved person in that household. The punishment for murdering your master was so severe that it was possible that another enslaved person, maybe with a family who was also in slavery, discovered the plan and decided to inform someone in an attempt to save their lives or the lives of their family. We don't know. We're writing some fan fiction again in our heads. It's really impossible to know who betrayed them or even if it was another enslaved person, because Plutarch doesn't even say that.
He doesn't say that. I mean, we're assuming it was probably an enslaved person because of the wording Plutarch has given us and who else would have known about the plan. But we don't know.
Because that is what passive voice can do for you. It can erase the person doing the thing, so now you don't know. The power of passive voice, kids.
So whatever Spartacus's original plan was, it was betrayed and is now lost to history. And as a result, Spartacus had to improvise. He and his followers had to stage their rebellion before they were ready. They made do with kitchen tools, and together they slaughtered their guards, killed their masters, and escaped to freedom.
The kitchen tools, very big trope in these stories of Roman slave rebellions.
And it makes sense because these are tools that enslaved people would have had ready access to.
Because they wouldn't have just let the gladiatorial weapons be out and about. Like, they probably kept those under lock and key unless gladiators were, like, training or fighting.
Absolutely. So Plutarch gives us another enticing quote about what the rebels did once they were on the road and free. Quote, "First, then, the gladiators repulsed those who came out against them from Capua. In this engagement, they got hold of proper arms and gladly took them in exchange for their own gladiatorial equipment, which they threw away as being barbarous and dishonorable weapons to use."
So, as soon as they were able, the gladiators got rid of their old weapons and equipment and got new weapons. And this would have been really important. Like, there's always some important component to these Servile War stories about how the rebels got their swords. Plutarch basically says that these weapons were seen as dishonorable and probably tools of the oppressors, and their armor would have been more about showing off their bodies than actually protecting their bodies and all that stuff.
But also, let's think about this. We talked about this in How to Train Your Gladiator and A Day at the Gladiatorial Games. Remember, you could have someone who was not a Thracian, trained in a Thracian style, which was a mockery of how Thracians fought. So your weapon that you were comfortable wielding might have been a mockery of your new brother, these people you're rebelling with, their culture. So yeah, they threw those the fuck down. They were like, you're upset that I'm using this Thracian-esque sword that is not a real sword. I'm not going to use it anymore because we're together now.
Yeah, but the other issue is that these weapons were show weapons. Like, they might not have been as high quality as the weapons used by the Roman army, because these weapons would have been made for fighting in spectacles, not necessarily made to survive a real battle with the Roman army. What the rebel army needed was strong, well-made swords, the kind of weapons that were made for killing in battle, not on the sands of the arena. And the only way to get those weapons was to steal them or to liberate or capture people who could make them.
So Spartacus and his growing army of rebels made their way to a place where they could be safe for a while, a place where they could regroup, a place where they could begin their revolution, a place that just over 100 years in the future would become known for one of the ancient world's most famous natural disasters, Mount Vesuvius. So that's it for this week. Join us in 2 weeks when we return to Spartacus's revolt and take you to a stronghold near Mount Vesuvius. In the meantime, you can find us on social at Ancient Hist Fan on Twitter and at Ancient History Fangirl on Facebook and Instagram.
And check out our Patreon. For as little as $2 a month, you can get access to exclusive episodes, including a brand new one on, I don't know when this drops, Jen, but I think this might be up by now, Jackasses of the Arena, Caligula. Just in case you can't get enough gladiator goodness, we are now doing a Patreon series that focuses on the times emperors decided that they were gonna play gladiator for a little while. It's always a good time. And the one we're starting with is Little Boots. We're so grateful to our patrons. The influx of new patrons we've had lately has really enabled us to keep this podcast going through extremely difficult times that we're all facing right now, and we just have to thank you. Thank you so much. Your support is the reason that we're able to continue this podcast, and we'd like to thank some new patrons today, wouldn't we, Jen?
We would.
We're going to just apologize in advance because we're now at least half a bottle into our Prosecco.
2/3?
Maybe almost done. We apologize in advance for mispronouncing your name, possibly drunkenly.
PJ Shapiro.
Ross Owen Quills.
Chris Cash.
Maggles. Just Maggles.
Just Maggles, we love it. And Jonathan Davis.
Thank you so much.
If you're not into Patreon, but you'd still like to help, check out our website, ancienthistoryfangirl.com, where you can kick us a few bucks through our Ko-Fi account and find a link to our amazing new merch.
And if you're not able to support us financially, and we totally understand, we get it, rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform, or just share the news about our show to your friends, family, or anyone else you know who loves epic stories about the ancient world.
Thank you so much for your support. We couldn't do this show without you.
Pretty, pretty, pretty pony. Pretty pony.
He thinks he has your back against a wall, but you did not survive the horrors of the arena to die atop a frigid cliff. He thinks you have never been in a situation this dire before. He is wrong. You refuse to let this be the end of you. But that doesn't mean the situation isn't desperate. Many of your people have already sunk into despair. You're trapped at the top of the mountain with only one winding way down, and the Romans guard the path. The weather is deadly. Even now, a storm lashes your people with ice and freezing wind. There is no shelter up here, nothing to build with. The top of the mountain is a thin rim of rock and dust, the cliffs on one side plummeting down to the plains below, on the other into the mountain's heart. There is nothing to eat and nothing to drink. You look around at your people, huddled and miserable in the middle of the storm, and you know they won't last long. And that's what the Romans are counting on. The praetor's plan is to wait you out, to wait until you are too weak with hunger and cold to fight back. Your rebellion's success rests on a sword's edge. You have faced insurmountable odds before, but every time you have outthought your enemies, you know the game they are playing, because you played it once too. You served at their side, watched their backs as they went to war against your own people. There has to be a way out. There is a commotion over to your left. You stride into a crowd of men to see several crouched around a pot full of rainwater, clutching their stomachs and groaning. They've tried to make tea from the vines, someone tells you, anything to fill their empty bellies. The vines, those are the only thing that grows on this cursed mountaintop, thick and nearly impossible to cut. There is one snaking past your sandal. You bend down to examine it. Its roots go deep. It is surprisingly pliable and sturdy. An idea comes to you. You might just have a way off this mountain, a way the Romans will never see coming. I'm Jen McMenemy.
And I'm Jenny Williamson. And this is Ancient History Fangirl.
So 2 weeks ago, we introduced you to Spartacus. We set the stage for his rebellion and showed you the complicated landscape of the Roman Republic during the 70s BC. The Republic was engaged in several wars, had a raging pirate problem in the Mediterranean, and was still rebuilding itself after the civil wars, or, as I prefer to call them, the Sulla v. Marius grudge matches. To say things were unsettled in the Roman Republic is putting it rather mildly. Into this boiling pot of discontent stew, our hero rises like a golden dumpling.
Who the fuck wrote this shit?
I remember it was my job to write the episode, and then...
Into this boiling pot of discontented stew, our hero rises like a dumpling.
Are you gonna let me finish and tell you exactly how this episode got written or not?
No, I just want to make fun of it right now.
So it was my job to write the episode, and I got completely overwhelmed, and I asked myself, what would Mark Antony do? Because that seemed like a good person to base my life choices on.
Oh my god.
So I took a nap in a blanket fort, and I woke up, and the whole episode was written, and the only thing I had to do was translate it from Latin to English. It was great.
That is true. I was with her every step of the way where she was going, I can't translate Mark Antony's Latin. It's too full of curse words.
Oh, Mark Antony didn't write this. It's definitely Julius Caesar.
Julius Caesar's responsible for our hero rises like a dumpling, eh?
He's very proud of that line.
Julius Caesar, what have you got to say for yourself?
I think he's not going to grace us with an answer. You know how upset he gets when you criticize his poetry.
Are you seriously giving me crickets right now, Julius Caesar? You know what? You offered yourself up for ridicule and now you can't take the heat. You're a wussy.
Fair enough.
I'm just saying, Julius Caesar has the tiniest nards.
Tiny little ding-dongs.
Oh, we're giving him so much shit right now.
Just because he has a magic D doesn't mean he has good nards.
In our last episode, Spartacus and his... nards. I just think the word nards is funny. Can we just move on, Jenny? Yes, we can. Okay, moving on. In our last episode, Spartacus and his compatriots broke out of the ludus, or gladiator school, in Capua and began their rebellion. Spartacus's legend was spurred on by the prophecies of his lover, a priestess of Dionysus called the Thracian Lady. She told a story of Spartacus's divine mission from Dionysus and his favor with the god that inspired people to follow him. The religion of Dionysus was the religion of the lower classes, the religion of the disenfranchised and the underdogs, and this message no doubt instantly made his band of revolutionaries appealing to the enslaved and displaced in the countryside of Italy. After breaking out of the ludus, Spartacus and his fellow gladiators got their hands on some proper weapons and made straight for Mount Vesuvius. This was a refuge that would allow his army a place to train, hide out, and grow their forces quickly before the Roman Senate could send out reinforcements.
Mount Vesuvius in the 70s BC was a sleeping giant, a massive volcano set in the Italian countryside. it had not erupted in living memory. The grounds around the mountain were fertile, great for growing wine and raising livestock. The ancient people had no idea the secrets the mountain contained, so they had numerous towns, rich country homes, villas, and farms all around the volcano. But this was also an area hit hard by the social and civil wars. There were still undeveloped places, farms and homes that had been ruined or abandoned after the redistribution of land left many family farmers homeless. In short, it was a great place for an army to disappear.
And the farms and villas that weren't abandoned provided an opportunity for Spartacus to swell and sustain his army. This was latifundia country, a place of large industrial-level agricultural estates populated by workforces of thousands of enslaved people who could be freed and recruited. The villas were perfect for plundering without risking getting too close to the city of Pompeii, and the mountains and hilly areas were ideal for melting into the woods like a ghost army. In short, Spartacus and his rebels picked a perfect place to begin their attack on the Roman Republic. So, this is where Spartacus set up his base camp. And before we move on with the story, let's take a minute to talk about what Spartacus's army looked like at this time.
Spartacus's army was made up of many factions of freed people: Germans, Gauls, Celts, Thracians, and we can extrapolate that there would have been Greek, Northern African, Spanish, Syrian, and Scythian people as well, and maybe even some Italian tribes. Essentially, Spartacus's army was incredibly diverse, made up of recently freed enslaved peoples that had been brought to the area from across the Roman Republic, and places where Rome was fighting its wars. The ancient sources tend to only focus on a few of these groups: the Gauls, Germans, Thracians, and Celts, but that just confirms their bias, because the Roman Republic during this time would have been much more diverse, and Spartacus's army absolutely would have reflected that.
Spartacus had several commanders who looked after various factions in his army. Two of the most important were Crixus and Anamaeus. These men were both Gauls, and they had trained together with Spartacus in Batiatus's ludus. They had taken the gladiator oaths together. They were bonded as brothers. Spartacus probably trusted them as brothers, despite their different tribal background from his own. The cult-like brainwashing that went into turning a gladiator into a brother worked in their favor. And when they broke out of their gladiator school, they did it together. Crixus and Anamaeus were both Gauls. We know very little else about them. We don't know their tribal affiliations. We don't know where they came from in Gaul. We do know that Crixus means curly-haired in Gallic, which I love. Picture it, Jen. He had these glorious curly locks, which were probably not doing so well in the Italian humidity.
I don't know. Maybe there's some ancient pomade or oil of some kind.
Maybe he just put some nourishing oil in there and ran his hands through his curls and came up with glorious beachy waves.
I mean, that's absolutely not how curly hair works, but let's pretend it is.
Anyway, so Crixus is clearly Fabio with glorious curly locks. He's like a curly-haired, beautiful man. That's my story. Shamelessly objectifying Crixus now. I'm going to stop.
Okay, I'm going to continue with the actual story.
Okay, I'm just going to be over here writing my fan fiction about Crixus.
You do whatever you have to do to get through this episode. So Spartacus would have looked to Crixus and Anamaeus to inspire and lead the Gauls in his army. Because as the army grew, Spartacus would have been less able to rely on the gladiatorial brotherhood to hold everyone together. We know from the Roman sources that Spartacus's army had internal rifts, and the factional struggles may have begun as early as this time at Mount Vesuvius. As we have talked about in our Vercingetorix series or our Thracians episodes, the Gauls and Thracians were tribal people with fierce tribal loyalties. They may have found it difficult to take orders from people outside of their tribal allegiances.
The fact that Spartacus had two generals in charge of the Gallic branch of his army suggests that he had a massive amount of Gauls in his army, and that they might have felt more allegiance to Crixus or Anamaeus than to Spartacus. Whether this is because of their tribal loyalties or an innate distrust of Thracians or something like that, we don't know. But we do know that, much like Vercingetorix, Spartacus was herding cats who really didn't like each other and whose only reason for being in the same room was because they hated the Romans more.
So Spartacus split his Gallic forces into two divisions, one led by Crixus and one led by Anamaeus. There are two reasons he may have had for doing this. One, Spartacus might have been afraid to give either Crixus or Anamaeus that much power over the largest branch of his army. I mean, that's sensible. Or two, Spartacus might have noticed infighting amongst the Gallic people and needed to divide the leadership to keep the tribes happy. We'll never know exactly why Spartacus chose to split the leadership of his Gallic forces, But we do know that it was a smart decision. It kept Spartacus in charge of the entire army and allowed him to be the driving and uniting force amongst the rebels.
If he was worried about one person under him having too much control over too large of a faction of his army, splitting his Gallic forces is the way to go.
Absolutely, especially when you think about how much he would have relied on his Gallic warriors. Because at that point in time, we know that Rome had been engaged in a lot of wars with Gaul. So the influx of freed Gallic people that Spartacus would have had in his army would have been really, really high.
The other thing to consider here is that I remember reading somewhere, and I don't remember where the source on this was, but I remember reading somewhere at some point that Gauls were especially in demand as slaves on latifundias because they were believed to be really strong and hardy.
That is an interesting thing, and that might be sort of why when the ancient sources talk about the breakdown of Spartacus's army, they lean so heavily on Thracians, Gauls, Celts, and Germans, because those were most of the people who were out in the countryside at this point in time.
They might have been people who were like in the latifundias specifically at this point in time. That doesn't mean that there weren't other people as well in Spartacus's army. It just means that these might have been the largest factions for various reasons. The other thing is, too, though, that Rome was currently in a war in Pontus, I guess in the Turkey area and borders on like their eastern provinces. So there would have been people of color from that area in slavery, possibly in Spartacus's army. I think it was probably very diverse.
It was incredibly diverse. We see the ancient sources focusing on what they think of as the people who Spartacus had in the largest groups, but that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that that was, in fact, the case, and it doesn't mean that that was the whole picture. So essentially, what Spartacus did was arrange his army like the Roman auxiliaries. He allowed his command of the different factions of his army to be enforced by hand-picked generals that shared a tribal connection with those factions and would be able to inspire those people's loyalties. He also allowed them to fight in the style that suited them best. So yeah, you're right. He's doing exactly what the Romans did when they had auxiliaries.
Yeah, and in the short term, while he doesn't have time or the luxury of like building up an army in a way that everyone can be drilled to do the same thing perfectly, he's got to let them fight in the way they know how to, because that's the way in which he's going to get the most out of his warriors that he's got with limited time.
I really think it's interesting charting the differences between Spartacus and Vercingetorix because they were both dealing with kind of the same problems. Like they had disparate forces. They were both in a time crunch. They had both fought on the Roman side before. And you see Vercingetorix trying to mold everybody into more of a homogenous group that only looked to him. But you see Spartacus kind of honoring and dealing with people's differences.
I think some of that probably comes from the things that were stripped away from Spartacus when he was enslaved. He wasn't allowed to be himself. He wasn't allowed to worship his gods. He wasn't allowed to have pride in his culture and his heritage. And I suspect when he escaped, one of the things he wanted to give back to the people who were serving with him was their own cultural identity. He didn't want to take that from them.
That's really a possibility. And to be clear, we don't know what was in Spartacus's head. There's no point in any of the ancient sources where they give us any part of his internal monologue. So we don't know that that's how he felt, but it could have been.
We don't even know that Spartacus was his name. It was probably his gladiatorial name.
AI is incredible. It can teach you how to fry an egg and even write a poem, pirate style. Yarr! But it knows nothing about your work. Slackbot is different. It doesn't just know the facts. It knows your schedule. It can turn a brainstorm into a brief. And it doesn't need to be taught. Because Slackbot isn't just another AI. It's AI that knows your work as well as you do. Visit slack.com/meet Slackbot to learn more.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
So Anyway, when you think about it, Spartacus's approach here was really smart. Let the people do what they did best, following someone from their culture that they could respect, while Spartacus himself dealt with the high-level concerns: feeding, housing, planning, and outmaneuvering the Romans.
Spartacus had two other generals as well, Gannicus and Castus. When they became generals is a little more up for debate, but they were Celtic and Gallic respectively, and they co-commanded the Germanic forces of Spartacus's rebels. We know little else about them. We don't know if they were also gladiators in Batiatus's Ludus, or if they had auxiliary experience, or why they were chosen to lead Germanic forces when neither of them were German. The speculation is literally endless. If you've watched the Starz TV show of Spartacus, and if you haven't, you now have homework. Go and watch it.
How do you live with yourself having not watched this TV show? It's excellent.
How do you listen to us? We've talked about it so many times, but anyway. But if you have watched it, then you know that Gannicus and Agron were based on the real Gannicus and Castus. But again, the entirety of stuff the ancient sources has about the Spartacus War is maybe 15 pages. So it's a very much you get to tell the story how you want to tell it.
So those were Spartacus's right-hand men. But who were his rank and file? Well, we know Spartacus started out with at least 74 escaped gladiators, the initial band of men and maybe women, this is up for debate, who broke out of the Ludus with Spartacus. So just about whether or not there were women, I have a feeling, knowing what I know about gladiators that Jen has taught me throughout this arc, I think that it was unlikely there were female gladiators with the original band because they were mainly seen in the provinces from what we know.
I think you're probably right. We don't know the answer here. In theory, the ancient sources would have told us because they would have been a novelty, but...
if there's women doing things that women don't usually do, the ancient sources really get excited about it. So, if there were lots of women fighting, we probably would have seen it, but maybe not.
Well, there's so few details about so many things, but I think whether or not there were women who were gladiators with Spartacus, there were definitely women who broke out of the school with Spartacus.
We could safely assume that there were women in his army at various points in time. There may have been women who broke out with him who were not gladiators, but who were enslaved on the Ludus. And on the Starz show, they do have a lot of women who are martial and who fight with Spartacus. And they mostly come from cultures where women are more martial. I think that that's also a possibility. We can't rule it out. I think that there were definitely women in the army. There may have been some women fighting in his army. I don't think that that's out there to assume.
I'm going to hands down say there were definitely women fighting in his army. The reality is that Spartacus's army was made up of a lot of different people from a lot of different cultures. But once you kind of joined that army, you were in for a penny, in for a pound. So if you were a female and you didn't decide, now's my time to learn some skills with the sword, I don't know what you were thinking, because the Romans were coming one way or another.
As good a time as any to pick up some fighting skills, right?
I would want to be able to kill them with a sword or fall on it.
So we can assume that there were lots of diverse tribes and nationalities in Spartacus's original group, because that's usually how a ludus operated. Lunista did not like keeping lots of gladiators of a similar background together. These warriors had been trained in the art of killing for show, a talent that was great when you were trying to win over the adoring Roman crowds, but not as useful when you were tackling a highly trained legion who had been taught to fight and die together.
But Spartacus was different. He had served time in the Roman auxiliary. He knew how the Romans fought. He knew what it was like to go up against the might of the legions. He had probably seen many people try it and lose. And he knew what he had to do to give his army a fighting chance. He had to take all of the skills he had honed in the ludus, all of the intelligence he had gathered in the auxiliaries, and combine them to create a rebel army that could stand up against Rome.
It's really a cliche that gladiators were formidable enough to stand up to the Roman army on their own. I don't think that that is the case. There are two other points in history I can think of besides the Spartacus Wars where you see gladiators facing off against the Roman army proper. One is during the Sulla and Marius Wars when Marius marshaled a troop of gladiators to defend the city against Sulla, and the other was later on during the Empire. We covered this in the Pupienus and Balbinus section of our series that we did about the Praetorian Guard, and both times the gladiators lost pretty badly.
And you know what? That actually doesn't surprise me, because most gladiators, as we said, they came from different tribal backgrounds. They didn't want to serve the Romans. In this instance, Spartacus is giving them one reason to fight and a common enemy.
We don't know how the gladiators in these other situations felt, but I think that that had to have been a factor. I think, and the other thing is that the difference here is that Spartacus really understood how the Romans fought because he's fought with them too, so he was not just a gladiator.
No. I mean, we don't 100% know, but we're just going out and saying he was in the auxiliaries.
You can't assume anything, really, with Spartacus, but I think that is a pretty safe assumption, right? Like, the ancient sources say that he was.
The ancient sources contradict themselves, but we're going to go with that. So right from the beginning, Spartacus had to have known that he needed more recruits. 74 gladiators could harass a smaller peacekeeping force, but eventually Rome would strike back with a full legion, or even larger force that Spartacus's ragtag army wouldn't be able to defeat. So as soon as he got to Mount Vesuvius, Spartacus started freeing as many enslaved people around Pompeii and the Latifundia-rich countryside as possible.
As soon as he set up his camp at Mount Vesuvius, Spartacus, this is a quote from Appian, quote, allowed many runaway domestic slaves and some free farmhands to join him. So according to Appian, Spartacus was happy to admit any runaway slaves into his army. His preference was for able-bodied, hardy men who could wield a sword or spear, but he also took domestic slaves, women, and children into his ranks. And this is because for many of these newly freed slaves, there was nowhere else to go. In our episode, A Day at the Gladiatorial Games, we looked at what could happen to an entire household of enslaved people if even one slave rebelled. Often, all of the enslaved people could be put to death after the murder of their master, regardless of their roles in the murder. So, if slaves on these latifundias were killing their masters and running off to join Spartacus, that left their fellow enslaved people in a tough spot. A lot of non-combatants would have needed somewhere safe to take refuge, and Spartacus's willingness to let these people into his camp had to have made him popular with enslaved people looking to rebel.
The other category of people admitted into Spartacus's army was free farmhands. Free farmhands were probably displaced farmers whose land had been taken away from them during the civil wars. These farmers were now unable to make a living doing the one thing they knew how to do, farm. Their only options were to work on their former land as a tenant farmer, barely scraping out an existence, or to go and work as a hired hand on a latifundia. Neither of these options were appealing to farmers, who just a generation ago had been able to make a good living working their own lands. But after the land redistributions of the social and civil wars, after the widespread expansion of the latifundia system, the options for a small family farmer were slim.
No doubt, many of these free farmhands had a chip on their shoulder, a desire to make the people who had taken away their livelihood and homes pay. And once again, Spartacus was happy to shelter these people. So these were the people who made up Spartacus's army, and while some of them may have been taken prisoner while fighting in armies that lost to Rome originally, and that's why they were enslaved in the first place, many did not have combat experience. Spartacus needed space and time to turn these people into a proper fighting force. So, in the spring and summer of 73 BC, Spartacus and his rebels hid out on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius. Spartacus and his generals trained the floods of new recruits who arrived daily. The more experienced fighters broke off into small bands who raided nearby villas and stole valuable supplies from travelers.
At first, the Roman Senate didn't take this band of escaped slaves very seriously. What they thought was happening was just a summer crime wave in the countryside. This was something that the Senate believed that the local authorities needed to just, sort out themselves. It was just like a little bandit problem, like the last time when the shepherds got frisky and took everybody's stuff. It's like that.
This wasn't unusual in the Roman countryside where bandits would do this stuff, like just, robbing travelers on the road, taking their stuff. We talked about how the latifundia system expanding in this region meant that there was an expansion of banditry because of the shepherds. So they may have seen it as just, more of the same of that.
Absolutely. And at this point, the Senate didn't consider this rebellion an actual rebellion. They certainly didn't think of it as an all-out war on their own soil. First, because the rebelling army was made up of runaway slaves and gladiators. The Romans did not consider them honorable, worthy opponents, and they didn't see Spartacus as a leader. In short, they didn't really see them as people. And if you're not feeling angry right now, then you're not paying attention. However, Spartacus's army was right in the middle of Latifundia country. Grain country, and as more and more enslaved people in this area abandoned the latifundias and joined Spartacus's army, it started to disrupt the grain supply. Plus, many of the senators had vacation homes in this area, and Spartacus's activity was making things just so unsafe. This could not be endured.
Not the vacation home, no!
No!
This is terrible. So, about a year into Spartacus's war, A young praetor named Gaius Claudius Glaber was dispatched with 300 soldiers to squash the definitely not a rebellion. And we need to stop for a minute and talk about who Gaius Claudius Glaber was and the men who would have fought beside him, because this is important. Gaius Claudius Glaber was a praetor, probably about 39 years old. He was a plebeian, but his name Claudius hints at possible connections to the famous Claudius clan that eventually became the Claudian side of the Julio-Claudians. You might have heard of them. You know, the ones that eventually produced Germanicus, our blue-eyed prince, our golden god.
Swoon!
I know. And the Emperor Claudius. Glaber was relatively high-ranked, and that praetors were just a step below consuls, which were the highest-ranking people in the Republic system. So Glaber was, on the one hand, clearly somebody ambitious and well-connected, but he may not have been first string here, right, Jen? Because he wasn't out fighting in the real wars against Sertorius or Mithridates. This is where all Rome's best people were at the moment.
Yeah, they're out fighting against the real threats to the Republic, not banditry and escaped slaves in the countryside.
Yeah, Glaber was at home, being sent into the countryside to handle a whole bunch of rowdy slaves, and this was not exactly an assignment that would win him much glory if he won, because a Roman was expected to win in this kind of conflict as a matter of course. If he didn't win, though, he would ruin his reputation, because what kind of Roman doesn't win against a bunch of bandits and escaped slaves, right? This was lose-lose here.
But if Glaber was someone who felt he had to prove himself, this would have been his proving ground. When the order came down from the Senate to bring an end to the crime wave that definitely wasn't a rebellion, Glaber was determined to do just that, because the faster he put an end to all this, the faster he could level up in his career and put low-level problems, like a bunch of escaped slaves and miscreants behind him.
I wonder if Julius Caesar was in Glaber's army.
Julius Caesar would never serve under Glaber. Oh, Miss Williamson, please.
If you were in Glaber's army, what were you doing? It's a big historical mystery.
Julius Caesar has told you many times that one does not discuss what one was doing during the Spartacus War.
I don't know, Julius Caesar. I think you're going to tell us by the end of this series.
Depends on how bored he is right now and what he's watching on Netflix.
Do you think we can tickle it out of him?
I'm not involved in that.
I don't know, Julius Caesar. How ticklish are you? Come here. I'm going to test this out.
I'm going to get us back to the story while Jenny tickles a ghost. So, who made up Glaber's army? According to Appian, quote, instead of legionary forces, Glaber had anyone they could quickly conscript on the way to Mount Vesuvius, because the Romans did not yet class the affair as a war, but as a kind of raid akin to piracy.
Most of the seasoned fighting men were off at war with Rome's foreign enemies, Sertorius in Spain, and the Mediterranean, and Mithridates in Pontus. The men left behind in Rome and mainland Italy were either retired soldiers or young men who had little to no battle experience, not a great combination. But the Roman arrogance was so great that they firmly believed that this less than experienced army was more than a match for Spartacus. They figured they'd have this rebellion wrapped up by the end of the summer max. Like, it's not going to take any more time than that, guys. Trust me. So Glaber marched his army of 3,000 inexperienced boys and senior citizens, brought out from retirement, down to Mount Vesuvius, and somehow pushed Spartacus's army to retreat up to the top of Mount Vesuvius.
How did he do that? We don't know. But here's what happened next, according to Plutarch. Quote, then Glaber, with his 3,000 soldiers, laid siege to Spartacus's army, in a position which they took up on a hill. There was only one way up this hill, and it was a narrow and difficult one, and was closely guarded by Glaber. In every other direction there was nothing but sheer precipitous cliffs. Glaber and his army forced Spartacus and his army, the size of which at this time is unknown, but it was definitely in the thousands, up to the top of the mountain. There was no way down the mountain, except one very narrow, difficult path controlled by Glaber. But Glaber couldn't exactly go up there, because his men would have to go up the narrow path, possibly one by one, where they could easily be picked off. But here's the thing, Glaber didn't have to go up there. All he had to do was wait Spartacus out. There was no game to be had on top of the mountain where nothing grew. He'd eventually get hungry. Spartacus was facing some grim choices here. Try to fight his way down, or wait until hunger made him and his men too weak to fight. Could the entire rebellion be over in a matter of months?
No.
I was so excited. I wanted some dun-dun-dun music.
No, Jen, because Spartacus crafted a very clever plan that was going to turn the tables. Remember, Spartacus was most likely, let's just go ahead and say Spartacus was a seasoned warrior who had served in the Roman auxiliary. He knew how the Romans fought. He knew that Glaber's plan was to wait until Spartacus's army was weak with hunger and then attack. This is how the Romans handled sieges, right? Hunger is a weapon. You saw this operating during the Gallic War, during the Carthaginian War. Like every time we see Romans having a siege practically.
Well, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Hunger is a weapon. If people get hungry enough, they will sell out potentially their own family.
It's a race against time. Is your army going to get hungry faster than their army?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, Spartacus is basically trapped up on a barren, rocky mountain where nothing grew, and it's very obvious that his army was going to get hungry faster. Time was not on his side. So he had to do something drastic. So here's what happened next, Jen, according to Plutarch.
Oh, tell me.
Quote, "The top of the hill was covered with wild vines, and from these they cut off all the branches that they needed and then twisted them into strong ladders, which were long enough to reach from the top, where they were fastened, right down the cliff face to the plain below." This would have been very long vines, let me tell you what. They all got down safely by means of these ladders, except for one man.
One man
who stayed at the top to deal with their arms. And he, once the rest had got down, began to drop the arms down to them. So he's dropping all the swords down to them. And then, when he finished this task, descended last and reached the plains in safety. The Romans knew nothing of all this. They did not hear the swords clattering down from the mountain at all. I don't know why. They just didn't hear it.
Well, I guess because they were probably wrapped up very tightly in some kind of cloth and they were dropped down. Maybe they were lowered down, like we say dropped, but they could have also been lowered down on a vine in like a basket or something.
Anyway, so the Romans, for whatever reason, maybe there were baskets, maybe they just weren't looking in that direction, maybe they were busy doing something else, I don't know. They knew nothing about all of this, and so the gladiators were able to get round behind them and to throw them into confusion by the unexpectedness of the attack, first routing them and then capturing their camp. All right, so this is my favorite part, Jen. I love this part.
Me too. This is just one of those parts that, like, you don't actually hear a lot about when people tell the Spartacus story about, like, the time he was besieged on Mount Vesuvius.
He weaves his own rope and then rappels down the mountain to attack the Romans from behind. Like, it's so epic.
It's so epic. It's one of the reasons why the story of Spartacus is just so enduring.
Yeah, but I also feel like this part of the story is almost never reproduced except for in the Stars series.
Yeah, we're just going to plug it again. I feel like Stars, would you like to sponsor this season?
Stars should be sponsoring us for the amount of times we've plugged their show.
Yeah, so if any of you work for Stars or know anyone who does.
Does anybody know Dustin Clare? Please give him my number.
Also, if anybody knows the historians or anyone who worked on the show, oh my God, we'd love to interview them.
God, swoon. Anyway, let's keep on topic here, okay? Spartacus and his rebels wove some vines into ropes and then rappelled down the mountains like fucking badasses to sneak behind Glaber's army, surprise them, capture their shit, their weapons, their supplies, and then kick their asses all the way back to Rome. Ancient Warfare 101 says the best way to win in an ancient world battle is to go around the back. Spartacus, let's just say, he was a good student in that way.
And this is one of the points in the story that completely confirms to me that Spartacus really was a Thracian and not just someone trained as a Thrax gladiator, which historians aren't sure was true or not true. Because the Thracians were mountain people from Eastern Europe and around the Black Sea, it doesn't surprise me that they knew how to climb down a mountain.
Right. They would have been totally comfortable in a mountain environment.
So after this, Glaber disappears from history. We don't know if he was killed in the battle or if he just slunk away into shame and obscurity after a group of rebel slaves handed his ass to him on a platter.
Like a Thanksgiving ham that's all glazed.
Or Christmas nut roast if you don't eat meat.
That's the situation with Glaber's ass. After this battle.
Glaber wouldn't be the first Roman commander to tango with Spartacus and come out with broken and bloody toes. He was just the first. But Spartacus also suffered a devastating loss around this time, because not long after, his general, Oenomaus, disappeared from the records. We don't know exactly what happened to him either, but historians think that he probably fell in battle, and his death would change the shape of Spartacus's army.
When Oenomaus and Crixus controlled the Gallic recruits, Spartacus had fairly solid control over the entire army. With 2 trusted Gallic commanders leading his large Gallic force, no one man had total control over the Gallic troops. But with Oenomaus lost, Crixus took sole command over the Gallic warriors. In the summer of 73 BC, this might have seemed like it was working out fine, but as summer wore into autumn, there is no doubt that cracks started to appear in the relationship between Spartacus and Crixus.
Even so, as summer bled into autumn 73 BC, Spartacus was the undisputed power in the countryside. His army, first filled with runaway slaves and free farmers, now gained a new kind of fighter. A fighter who had a very specific skill set. A fighter who knew the fields and hills of the countryside like the back of his hand. A fighter who could hunt and track and scout, as well as fight and brawl. I'm talking, of course, about Jenny's beloved shepherds.
Swoon!
So I also think like one of the things that shepherds don't get enough credit for, in addition to being able to hunt and track and fight and brawl and know the countryside, is they were probably expert slingers.
They had to have been, right? First off, a sling is extremely cheap to make. Like, you just need, I don't know, a few strips of, like, leather.
Your ammunition is free.
Your ammunition is free, so it's just like rocks you find on the ground. So I feel like they had to have been slingers because using slings would have been really key in fighting off, wolves and other predators attacking the herds, for example. I would think that a lot of the shepherds would have had sling experience, and as we all know, slingers were a very deadly contingent of any army.
They were, and I would posit that potentially Spartacus didn't have anything like this before that. Most of the people he would have with him would have been warriors.
Actually, it sounds like a lot of Spartacus's people were non-combatants, and those that were maybe soldiers in armies that had been enslaved because they lost.
Yeah, that's kind of what I mean. Of the fighting people, it doesn't sound to me like they were slingers. Sure. And the people who we are talking about who mostly had joined his army were the Gauls and the Celts and the Thracians. And the Germans were very much of a hierarchical warrior culture where actually what they would have wanted to be was a warrior with a sword or maybe a bow and arrow. So we're not talking a lot of people who are like, let me train to be a good slinger.
Slingers were low status in the army, even though they were extremely effective. So the higher status warriors would have wanted to be swordsmen or cavalry or something like that.
But the thing about slingers is they would be able to really help Spartacus in a different type of guerrilla warfare that he hasn't seen yet.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything in the ancient sources about him having slingers in his army. This is just us conjecturing that it would have made a lot of sense, and it would have made a lot of sense that shepherds in particular would have had this skill.
Yeah, and it would have been a great skill to teach to some of those non-combatants, because it takes skill to be a slinger, but most people could be a slinger.
Yeah, you don't need a lot of money to pay for a lot of fancy metal accoutrements.
Not even that. You don't have to have a lot of upper body strength. You don't have to be able to run really quick. You don't need any of those things to be a slinger.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Like, the barrier of entry would be very low.
Exactly. So after Spartacus defeated Glaber, he'd proved himself to the shepherds. They'd been watching this situation carefully, taking advantage of the chaos, I imagine. But now it was clear that Spartacus was the biggest bad in the countryside, and the shepherds, agents of chaos themselves, wanted in.
According to Plutarch, quote, "And now they were joined by numbers of herdsmen and shepherds of those parts, all sturdy men and fast on their feet. Some of these they armed as regular infantrymen and made use of others as scouts and lighter troops." So I've got to say that the shepherds had to have been a game changer for Spartacus. Now he had recruits who were pretty much ready-made infantry. They already had fighting skills. They did not need to be trained. And the shepherds knew the land and its resources like nobody else. Specifically, they knew where the wild ponies lived, Jen.
I know, Jenny.
This is my favorite part.
This is another part about the Spartacus story that I have never seen anyone actually, tell.
It's not in the Stars series either.
It's not. But this was one of the moments when I was doing the research for this episode. It was probably 1 or 2 a.m. my time because I'm such a night owl. And I texted her, Jenny, Spartacus tamed wild ponies for his army.
And I literally just swooned so hard that I hit my head on a table and passed out. And my cat ate my face.
I mean, thankfully she fell over on FaceTime so I could see what Heloise was doing. And then I made a loud "Wah!" and she stopped biting before she took out Jenny's entire eyeball.
That's right. My eyeball is still here. I have told my cat many times that when I die, she's allowed to eat my face. I think she just thought that it was time. It's like, oh, my inheritance, Jenny's face. This has taken a very dark turn. We're trying to tell you about how having a cavalry would make all the difference in fighting the Romans for Spartacus, but up until now, Spartacus had probably struggled to put a cavalry together. Thracians were famous horse lords. They were famous for being able to capture and train wild horses. They were good at this shit, okay? This is well within Thracian skill set. But while Spartacus could capture and take control of some horses from the Roman army, the horses that were taken in battle probably wouldn't necessarily be, of the best quality, let's say. Some of them might have been wounded, which is really sad and upsetting. If these poor horses were taken from travelers or villas that the rebels raided, those would not be war horses. They would be workhorses. And they would probably be unfamiliar with battle and very skittish in battle. So if Spartacus wanted to create his own cavalry, he needed to find a supply of horses that he could mold into his own personal steeds.
The shepherds led Spartacus to herds of wild ponies, which he and his men captured and trained as war horses. And before you ask, Jenny, no, we don't know the breed of horse. We don't know what populations they descended from. And we don't know how the rebels caught and tamed the wild ponies or horses.
I don't know how you know exactly what questions I'm going to ask, but you do.
Oh, I do, because your love of horses is like my love of penguins and my love of puffins and elephants and rabbits, foxes.
You know how obsessed I am with horses.
I do. But here's the thing. The ancient sources just weren't interested. They were not interested in this aspect of Spartacus's war. I don't know why. It's ridiculous. They should have been. Modern historian Barry Strauss, in his book, The Spartacus War, gives us these small, tantalizing details about wild horses. Quote, during their travels, the rebels had captured wild horses that roam the southern Italian countryside. To their good fortune, they were in horse country. Even today, wild horses are seen in the mountains of southeastern Campania. Celts, Germans, and Thracians were good enough tamers to train them, and so was born the insurgents' cavalry.
So, I bet you I know what kind of horse this was, Jen.
Oh God, I bet you did a deep dive into what kind of horse this was.
So the Pentro horse.
The Pentro, of course. How could I not know that?
So the Pentro horse is a breed of feral horses that lives in the Molise region of Italy, which is right around where Spartacus was active, Jen. It's a very old breed, unique to the region, and it's been used for centuries as a workhorse and also raised for food in this area. And they're muscular and stocky, which would have made them good cavalry horses. And they're intelligent, kind, and easily trainable.
I feel like this is the me of horses.
They're also on the verge of extinction at the moment.
This might also be the me of horses.
Well, that's a real dark thing to say, Jen. Maybe you should get some talk space. I don't know.
There's just the one of me, Jenny. I haven't multiplied.
I'm trying to tell you about the Pentro horse. Can we just talk about the Pentro horse? So the Pentro horse is not a protected species in the area, despite the fact that there's only about 250 of them left. And there's been an influx of wolves in their habitat recently, which has brought the numbers down more. I mean, these poor horses just have to fight off wolves all the time. And I don't know if this breed of horse itself was around since the time of Spartacus, but there's a possibility that it's descended from domesticated or feral horses who were around at the time of Spartacus. So maybe there's a connection there. And if I can find like a rescue association specifically dedicated to the Pentro horse, I will put it in the show notes. So please check there if you would like to help these horses.
So, in the summer/autumn of 73 BC, Spartacus and his men rounded up and trained these wild horses, turning them into war ponies. Spartacus built his own cavalry made up of war ponies that he trained himself. Swoon. I mean, this part of the story is just so ripe for romance novels. One day, I'm going to write a romance novel about Spartacus or just a historical fiction novel about it, and I will not leave out the war ponies.
Just imagine Crixus with his lovely, luscious, curly locks swaying in the breeze.
Crixus with his locks and Spartacus and just the entire story from a female point of view.
Who's gonna ride your wild horses, Jen?
Spartacus.
I know!
So this is yet another place where I think Spartacus was definitely a Thracian. Because Thracians were horse lords, as we've said many times. They were known for their skill in breeding and taming and training the finest horses. But while Spartacus was putting together his cavalry, another major event happened that would have a profound impact on Spartacus' story. And this one was far from the shores of Italy. Sertorius, that rebelling general, was assassinated. We mentioned Sertorius in our last episode. He was a disaffected Roman populist currently leading a rebellion in Spain, the last of the great Marian populists from the Sulla and Marius Wars. This is a big rabbit hole, so we're going to grossly oversimplify things here. But it's important for the story, and it's also important to remind you that at this point, 3 armies were in open rebellions against Rome: Sertorius, Mithridates, and Spartacus. Rome was up to its eyeballs in rebels. And if you are a Patreon subscriber, I think you're going to get to learn a little bit more about Sertorius very soon. Jenny has said that she would love to have an episode about him.
I believe that was Jen who said that she was going to write this episode to please me and to please all of you, because Jen is a people pleaser and we're going to use it against her at every opportunity, aren't we, kids?
Stroke, stroke, pretty, pretty pony.
I just think that that is exactly how Spartacus and his beautiful Thracian and Gallic and Celtic people trained those horses. They stroked them and they said, pretty, pretty, pretty pony, pretty pony. It would work on me.
If Spartacus decided that he was going to brush my hair and get all the tangles out and then maybe like comb it.
You'd let him ride you, wouldn't you? Yep, you would. I would. I'd be like, you can ride me, Spartacus.
I mean, how is that even a question?
You have to be exactly Spartacus height to ride this ride. I'm swooning over here.
Heloise, no! You can't have the eyeballs yet. No!
No, don't let my cat eat my eyeballs. This is Jen's role in our friendship. Explaining to my cat when she cannot eat the eyeballs.
One day I'm going to have a pet.
All right, let's not go into a dark place. So, the Senate had initially sent a general named Metellus to deal with Sertorius, but after it became clear that Metellus was getting his ass glazed like a Christmas ham up there.
Like a Christmas glabber ass.
Christmas glabber ass. What do you want for Christmas? I want a glabber ass. Glazed.
I'm getting a drink. I'll be back.
Jen needs a drink. Anyway, while Jen's getting a drink, I'm going to finish this paragraph. They hauled out the big guns and sent Pompey in to help him out. Sent the teenage butcher up there. Pompey Shark.
He wasn't a teenager at this point in time, though.
No, he wasn't, but they still called him the teenage butcher because of all the butchering he did when he was a teenager.
Or because his dad was a butcher. One or the other.
Strabo the butcher. I don't think it was because he was an actual butcher.
Damn, I'm not getting my history right again. Shocker.
Strabo the butcher.
There's not enough people named Strabo.
There's not enough people who have, like, fun nicknames like Strabo the butcher and the teenage butcher. So anyway, we're moving on. Sertorius had cobbled together a diverse group of Spanish tribes and disaffected legions, and he'd inspired intense loyalty in them. And his efforts were being secretly funded by rich Roman senators, once Marian aligned, who agreed with his cause. So Sertorius was like the last of the great Marian populists, and there were still Marians in the Senate back in Rome at this point, but the Sullans had won. Even though Sulla himself was dead, the Sullan faction was in control. That was still a thing in Rome. There were still people who adhered to Marian populist principles, and they were people who got, like, beat up behind the Senate building a lot. Like, they were not doing so hot down there.
This was not a time where you wanted to be like, but I'm pro-Marian. I think he's got some good ideas.
Take him out behind the Senate building. That was kind of how it was going. So some of these bullied Roman senators who were Marian aligned were funding Sertorius.
And we're not necessarily saying that Marian was better, because I don't know if we can make that case that Marius was better.
I haven't done a giant deep dive, but I think it's probably safe to say that Marians were more populist than Sulla. Like, Sulla was a conservative.
And he was a bag of worms, so.
He was also a bag of worms, and Marius wasn't. So if you got to pick someone based on who was and was not a bag of worms, it's probably safe to say Marius. Anyway, so Sertorius was up there in Spain, attracting allies and getting all this money in from the heavily bullied Marian factions in Rome on a secret basis so they didn't get beat up even more behind the Senate building. And he was causing the Sullan faction-controlled Roman Senate a lot of trouble. But those rich Marian backers, secret Marian backers, were beginning to realize that this was a doomed effort, that Sertorius was doomed. And around this time, the Senate issued a decree that, according to Plutarch, quote, should any Roman kill Sertorius, he would be given 100 talents of silver and 20,000 acres of land. And if he was in exile, he would be free to return to Rome. So this was a huge incentive for somebody to just get some initiative and stick a knife in Sertorius's back and end this war.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what happened. A group of Roman senators conspired with a man named Perperna, an ally of Sertorius, to assassinate him. And this assassination, by the way, was extremely dramatic and took place at a big feast, red wedding style. And when Jenny does the mini-sode, it's going to be so amazing.
When Jen does the episode on Sertorius.
But this is not that mini-sode, unfortunately. So all you need to know, for the sake of this story, is that in the autumn of 73 BC, Properna gave Sertorius the stabby stab in public in the middle of the dinner, although Properna didn't actually wield the knife himself.
Sertorius got the business end of somebody's knife in the middle of dinner.
With Sertorius dead, there was still some mopping up to do, but eventually Pompey and Metellus would put down the remnants of his rebellion for good, and nothing would keep them from bringing their battle-hardened Roman legions back to Italy, where Spartacus and his army were currently enjoying a golden summer and autumn in the countryside, taming wild horses, celebrating their victories, and plotting their revolution. Spartacus didn't know it yet, but the clock was ticking. So that's it for this week. Join us in 2 weeks when we return to Spartacus's rebellion. In the meantime, come and find us on social and say hi. We're at Ancient Hist Fan on Twitter and at Ancient History Fangirl on Facebook and Instagram.
And make sure you check out our Patreon. For as little as $2 a month, you get access to exclusive episodes like the one Jen is going to write about Sertorius. We have about 12 minisodes on our Patreon, with topics ranging from mythological ways to die in the arena, to pirate queens, to what Julius Caesar thought about the Battle of Winterfell in Game of Thrones. We release a new minisode every month, and we are so grateful to our patrons. Our patrons have enabled us to keep this podcast going during some very difficult times. So thank you so much to all of you. Your support is the reason we're able to keep this podcast going. We have some new patrons to thank, don't we, Jen?
We do, and we thank our patrons who are in our $5 and above tier. So if you're supporting us at our $2 level, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
We still appreciate all of our $2 level subscribers as well. So we're going to read out some new $5 and up subscribers, and apologies if we mispronounce anyone's name, which is probably going to happen because it's just how we do.
Rose Thorne,
Publito's Way,
Kay Thomas,
Matt Tarlock,
Tamara Hartley,
Nick McAllister, and Kiara Oyola.
If you're not into Patreon, but you'd still like to help, check out our website, ancienthistoryfangirl.com, where you can kick us a few bucks through our Ko-Fi account and find a link to our amazing merch.
And if you're not able to support us financially, and we totally understand, it's rough out there right now, rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Or just share the news about our show to your friends, family, or anyone else you know who loves epic tales about the ancient world.
Thank you so much for your support. We couldn't do this show without you.
This time, Spartacus meant business.
They tell you that he fell like a gladiator, fierce and unbreakable, his head held high as he raged in battle against the legions, his warriors behind him, following his every command, their thirst for Roman blood, their skill in battle unmatched until this moment. When the legions were finished with the Gallic forces, the ground strewn with their broken bodies, the Romans found him last. His eyes were fixed on the mountain. Even in death they could not take the sky from him. And when he went to join his people in the afterlife, they would sing his praises, toast his victories, and celebrate how he died, a warrior general who had achieved great things. They would serve him the hero's portion and anoint his head with a golden crown and a torque that told his tales. You've had your differences. Sometimes you swore he couldn't see sense or reason, but he was your brother, and if you had your way, you would have given him a burial with all the honors, one as great as such a legend deserved. But instead the rain will weep for him, and the carrion birds will feast upon his flesh. He is gone from this world, but you remain, and every day your men feel his loss. He would have led them to victory. He would have seen that trap the Romans set for you at the Alps. It is easy for them to judge your actions, because you are still here, a mortal man, while he has passed into the halls of legend and now sits at the god's right hand. But you know the truth. His war was always a doomed one, a calculated loss. He gave his life so you could lead your people through the Alps and to true freedom. And you have failed him. You failed to cross the Alps. You escaped the Roman trap, but at such a high cost. Your Gallic warriors are gone, your Germanic troops are scattered to the winds, and your army has nowhere to go but south, back into the gaping maw of the Republic. You cannot let his death be in vain. You know what your people need, a chance to mourn together, to give meaning to all they have lost. You will give them a spectacle that will make them remember who they are, how far they have come, and that they still walk arm in arm with Dionysus, and that together, though you have suffered grievous losses, you will not stop until the war is won, until your people are free. You turn to your other generals, men who have barely survived their recent battles with Rome. Bring me the prisoners. We shall give him the funerary games he deserves. Let the Romans kill and die for our gods in our arena. I'm Crixus.
And I'm Spartacus. And this...
No, I'm Spartacus!
You just said you were Crixus.
Wait, could I be Gannicus instead?
I'm Spartacus, and she's Crixus. And this is Ancient History Fangirl. 2 weeks ago, we left Spartacus and his rebels victorious on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius. Spartacus's army had defeated the praetor Glaber. The shepherds and herdsmen had joined his troops, and he was taming wild ponies to form an infantry. Crixus was letting his curly hair loose on the Italian countryside, just tossing it to and fro, and the ponies were coming to him. Oh my god, I'm swooning right now. The rebels were enjoying a glorious Italian summer with just enough humidity, not too little, we don't want the air to be dry, and not too much, we don't want Crixus's glorious curly locks to be all frizzy and messy. It was just enough humidity. It was perfect, it was the perfect Italian summer.
It was perfect. It was the kind of thing that, like, when you watch a movie and it flashes back to, like, this moment in your teenagehood where everything is beautiful and nothing harms you, that's what they were doing. Obviously, we're hamming this up. It wasn't quite like that.
So Crixus's hair was so on point this summer. Meanwhile, the Senate in Rome was finally starting to realize that this Spartacus problem was not going away. It was getting bigger, daily. The Senate spent their not-so-glorious Italian summer because the Senate was not having as good a summer. They were just not. Regrouping, planning exactly what they would do next to deal with their definitely not a war, but maybe possibly at this point we're going to call it a rebellion, problem.
And in Spain, Sertorius, the populist leader who had rebelled against Rome and driven the Republic to war in the Mediterranean, was dead. Pompey Shark and his co-general Metellus were busy mopping up the mess that was Sertorius' rebellion.
Listen, the teenage butcher was there to butcher.
Now we have our ticking clock. Everything is in, like, countdown mode.
That's right.
In the autumn of 73 BC, Spartacus and his army were living their best life raiding Lucania and Campania. Food would have been ripe for the taking, with lots of fruits and vegetables ready to be harvested. We assume there weren't any blights or anything going on. Things were actually going about as well as they could go for the rebel army at this point in time. But Spartacus was well aware that Rome wasn't going to let them raid and pillage forever. Their golden hour was coming to a close, and they had to be prepared for whomever Rome sent to challenge them.
In the autumn of 73 BC, Rome sent a praetor named Publius Varinius. Publius Varinius.
Guys, we've had enough wine that Publius is going to kill us.
We get amused by very small things here.
You know there are not enough men named Publius.
Publius Varinius. Publius Varinius was sent to deal with the Spartacus problem, and Varinius basically decided he was going to outsource this. He sent out 2 deputy commanders, and the first one was a man named Furius, which I just love. His name was Furius.
Every time I was typing this, I just thought it was Furious, and I was like, it's not that, Jen. It's not Furious.
Furius. This man's name was actually Furious. So Varinius outsourced his little Spartacus problem. He decided he was going to outsource it first to Furius. And this did not go so well for Furius. Let's just let Plutarch break it down for us. Quote, first they, the rebel army, engaged and routed a force of 2,000 men under his deputy commander, Furius by name. And then came the turn of Cosinius, which is another dude that Varinius decided to outsource this to when Furius fell on his fucking motherfucking face. Anyway, so then came the turn of Cosinius, who had been sent out with a large force to advise Verinius and to share with him the responsibility of the command. Spartacus watched his movements closely and very nearly captured him as he was bathing near Salinae. So Spartacus kicked Furious's ass so easily and so thoroughly that we have actually no details about how he did this, because the ancient sources are just like, well, that happened super fast. We didn't even blink. We're just not going to include the details because we didn't even know what they are. After that, Spartacus kicked Cosinius' ass in the bath.
We're only on page 2.
The man who rubbed him in the bath turned out to be Spartacus.
If you're part of the Roman aristocracy, there is a 1 in 3 chance that you might get rubbed to death in the bath.
Accurate. This is almost another ancient history fangirl man dies in a bath story. However, in this instance, Cosinius isn't dead yet.
Is there a baby in your life who's about to start solid foods? This can be such a confusing and stressful time. As a mom of 7, I really struggled with spoon feeding my oldest baby. But once I realized that babies can safely feed themselves real, wholesome foods using the principles of baby-led weaning, feeding the rest of my babies became an actually enjoyable experience instead of something that I used to dread. Hi, I'm Katie Ferraro, college nutrition professor and dietitian specializing in baby-led weaning, and I host the Baby-Led Weaning Made Easy podcast. Each week, we cover evidence-based, safe infant feeding practices for parents and caregivers of babies who are 6 to 12 months of age. So, if you're confused by all the conflicting info you hear about starting solid foods, or you want easy, actionable tips on how to safely prep food for your baby, or introduce allergenic foods, or figure out when to drop a milk feed, we cover all that and more, plus interviews with the world's leading feeding experts in 2 new episodes each week. Search Baby-Led Weaning wherever you listen to podcasts, and happy feeding.
Calling all kids in the car. Brittany and Meredith here from the chart-topping Family Road Trip Trivia podcast. Are you dreading another silent car ride with the fam? We've got the cure. 3 rounds of fresh trivia every single week. Movies, music, even science and Disney. We've got something for every trivia buff in the car. No more crickets chirping on those long journeys. The Family Road Trip Trivia podcast is your secret weapon for connecting and laughing with kids of all ages. Teens, toddlers, adults, it doesn't matter. Spark their curiosity and challenge their brains with every episode. New episodes drop weekly wherever you get your podcasts. Search for the Family Road Trip Trivia podcast and turn those car rides into epic adventures.
No one hates history, they just haven't found the right teacher yet. Or in this case, a nerdy best friend who loves to tell you all about world history, women's history, and weird history. Hi, I'm TK, the creator of For the Love of History podcast, a place for people who want to learn more but don't know where to start, and history lovers who want to break from the mainstream. From rat trials to warrior women, we cover topics from every country and era. Whether you're a history expert or just starting out, there's a place for you here in the Time Machine. So join me every Friday on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube for a brand new topic. See you there. Bye.
After both Cosinius and Furius covered themselves in shame, Verinius entered the fray.
Verinius decided to roll his sleeves up and do shit himself for once.
Allegedly. But according to Plutarch, Verinius didn't fare much better. Quote, after their battle, he, Verinius, only just managed to escape, and Spartacus immediately seized all his baggage and then pressed on hard after him and captured his camp. There was a great slaughter, and Cosinius was among those who fell. Next, Spartacus defeated the praetor himself in a number of engagements and finally captured his lictors and the very horse that he rode. He even took his horse right out from under him.
Stone cold.
So what is Plutarch telling us? After Cosinius' near-death experience in the bath, he joined Verinius' camp. Potentially, he might have actually led Spartacus' army straight to Verinius. But let's be honest, Verinius had a large force of Roman legions, so it would be hard for Spartacus and his scouts to miss it. After all, Spartacus' scouts, now made up of shepherds and herdsmen, knew this land better than anyone else. Certainly better than Verinius' newly raised legions.
So according to Appian, after the defeat of Verinius, Spartacus' army swelled. Quote, People flocked in still greater numbers to join Spartacus. His army now numbered 70,000, and he began to manufacture weapons and gather stores. The government in Rome now dispatched the consuls with 2 legions. So the consuls are the highest-ranking political people in Rome. Consuls were both political leaders and military leaders, so they're basically hauling out third-string consuls who are currently in Rome as opposed to fighting any of the wars that are happening outside of the Roman boundaries. So what happens next is kind of confusing in the ancient sources. So we're going to refer to the very convenient timeline that has been created for us by Barry Strauss in the book The Spartacus War. So according to Barry Strauss's timeline, this is the point where Spartacus's army decided to spend the winter in a town called Thurii. Spartacus knew that his army needed time to actually become an army. The Romans were not going to stop. The more Spartacus defeated them, the better the generals the Romans were going to send against them. Like, basically, they were just going to send him bigger and bigger bosses until somebody defeated him.
Yeah, it's like, when you play a video game.
Exactly. And before that happened, Spartacus needed to give his sudden influx of new recruits time to raise their skill level. And he also needed somewhere to spend the winter. Somewhere defensible, preferably a place with high walls and a place big enough to accommodate 70,000 people.
So Spartacus set his eyes on the city of Thurii. Thurii was a small city, or maybe a large town, in southern Italy, kind of on the insole of the Italian boot, kind of high up there on the arch. And it had what Spartacus needed: high walls, lots of supplies to feed his army. It had access to a port, and the towns around it were easy to get to and plunder. It was also kind of at this point in time a little bit in gentle decay. It also had access to mountains, and should anything go wrong, would allow Spartacus 2 different places for his army to melt away into. Either the sea, escaping by boat, or into the mountains. It was an ideal place to spend a winter. So Spartacus and his army took the city. We don't really know how he did this. Historians suggest that he had an inside man who opened the gates and let the army slip in at night. We don't know if that's true, but we do know when the city was taken, there was much bloodshed and carnage. Plutarch, our main ancient source for the Spartacus War, paints Spartacus in a pretty decent light, as a worthy foe, an intellectual even, far more Greek than barbarian. This was Plutarch's way of saying he was articulate, because Plutarch is a dick.
Thracians can't be intellectual, only Greeks can.
Yeah, but I wanted to stop here for a minute and look at a passage from Sallust. Sallust was a writer who lived during the time of Spartacus. He's the source that later writers like Appian and Plutarch were probably working from. Of all of them, he was probably the most accurate because he would have had access to recent eyewitnesses. And maybe he was one himself. We don't know where he was at this point in time. And this isn't to say he didn't have an axe to grind, because he did. We're just saying he's a contemporary of the events.
Yeah, and one of his axes to grind might have been that he wanted to make Crassus look bad, because Crassus wasn't necessarily a popular person during this time. So he might have been aggrandizing Spartacus a little bit to make Crassus look like the villain in his story.
There's that. And also, I don't know much about Sallust's leanings in later years towards things like the First Triumvirate. I haven't done that deep a dive.
Anyway, so the problem that we have with Sallust's account of Spartacus is that that account has been lost to history. But a few fragments do survive, and the passage we're about to read you is one of them. It's one of the rare passages in Sallust that we get about Spartacus. And this is a passage that does not appear in Appian or Plutarch, and it paints a much more brutal picture of Spartacus and his followers. And this passage is important because it shows us what it would have looked like to be a person in one of the towns that Spartacus and his army were raiding. It gives us a really rare glimpse into that perspective.
Yeah, and I just want to stress this isn't necessarily Thurii, but it's one of the other towns around it.
Okay, so this was going on not just in Thurii, but in a number of towns around Thurii. So Spartacus was a Thracian, and we know that Thracians were famous mercenaries who lived off plunder and riches gained from their wars. It's nice to believe that Spartacus was above plundering.
I mean, that's how I want to believe he is. That's how my Crixus with his long flowing hair, and my Gannicus, and my Castus are, but that doesn't seem really realistic.
The reality is that plundering was the Thracian way of life, and what we're about to share with you from Sallust's account of the Spartacus War is incomplete, but it shows us a different side of the mythic hero. And the way that we're going to read this, we should probably explain that, right, Jen?
Yeah, so I included this, and I could have chopped and changed bits and pieces of it to make it feel like it flowed more as we were reading it to you, so that you don't have these moments of what's happening here? I didn't do that for a real reason. This is the contemporary source that we have to Spartacus's war. I want you to see how fragmented it is, and I want you to see the pieces that historians have filled in along the way to sort of fill in these gaps. So we're going to read it like this. Jenny is going to be the main person reading you the story.
I'm going to be reading the words that are on the page that we have that have been translated from the Latin that is there in Sallust's passage.
And when you hear my voice, I'm going to be reading you things that have been added. So essentially the things in brackets that either are telling you something is missing or something someone has later on down the road added to clarify a passage.
Right, so there have been a lot of translators who, over the years, have added phrases that are not there that they think probably would have been there based on the context. These are suppositions. So we want you to see how fragmented this is and what's been added. So expect this to sound as fragmented as we read it on the page. And also, just a heads up, there is some rape in this.
And violence.
Okay, so are you ready, Jen?
I am so ready to be your fragment.
Okay, so this is what happened when Spartacus and his army took over a local town around Thurii. According to Sallust, quote, immediately the slaves, contrary to the orders of their leader, turned to raping the young girls and mothers and others.
2 lines missing.
Now, and tormented those who remained in a shocking way with horrible wounds, and sometimes left their mutilated bodies still half alive. Others set fire to the buildings, and many of the slaves from the district, whose character inclined them to be allies, brought out the possessions which their masters had hidden, or dragged out their masters themselves. Nothing was sacred or inviolable to these men, who had the savagery of barbarians and the temperament of slaves. Since Spartacus could not stop these
outrages,
he earnestly begged them to forestall the news of what they had done, and quickly,
3 lines missing,
that they would
earn the hatred of the inhabitants,
who had been cruelly attacked
and slaughtered,
heavy, mostly, ... after staying there for that day,
and the following
night, with the number of
slaves in his army
now doubled, he
moved camp,
at first light and
halted,
in a fairly wide plain,
where he saw
that the farmers had come out of their buildings. By that time, the autumn crops were already ripe
in the fields.
But then it was already fully daytime. The residents learned from their
fleeing
neighbors that the slaves were heading
in their direction
and
hurried away to the nearby mountains
with all
their families.
So there's a lot of dehumanization here from Sallust. Like, you definitely get the, like, oh, they had the mindset of barbarian slaves. And it's impossible to read this quote and not be angry at the person who wrote it for that stuff. But this quote is one of the few that we've chosen to include that shows the point of view of just an ordinary person who might live in one of these towns that Spartacus is sacking and taking over. So yeah, it really sucked to be a common person during the Spartacus War.
This quote also shows us that Spartacus was starting to lose control of his men. According to Sallust, he ordered his people not to rape and pillage, but he wasn't able to contain them. This hints that by this point, Spartacus's leadership was fragile, to say the least. Warriors serving under him had their own agenda and their own feelings about what justice they wanted to mete out to the Roman people. In the historical novel that I am constantly writing about Spartacus, I like to imagine that he would have relied heavily on his priestess of propaganda, the Thracian lady, rolling her out before his army to speak of her visions from Dionysus, visions that involved an army unified under one moral leader, Spartacus, of how united together under Spartacus's leadership, they could overthrow the might of Rome. But none of the sources tell us this. But given how clever Spartacus was, how beloved Dionysus was across many tribes and cultures, it seems very likely that for a long time, worship and words of prophecy from the Thracian lady helped Spartacus keep control over his rebel army, if she was still in that army, if she was still alive, if she ever existed in the first place. But here's the thing, if she had this power, if he had this propaganda priestess, everything at this point in time was changing. Here's what happened in the region around Thurii after the raping, pillaging, and killing according to Appian. Quote, Spartacus seized the mountains around Thurii, together with the town itself, and then prevented traders bringing in gold and silver, barred his own men from acquiring any, and bought exclusively iron and bronze at good prices, without harming those who brought them. As a result, they had plenty of raw material and were well equipped and made frequent raiding expeditions. They again confronted the Romans in battle, defeated them, and on that occasion too returned to camp laden with booty.
So the rebels now had a base camp. They had a place to wait out the winter, to train up their soldiers, to get new weapons made, and to regroup, to actually deal with traders in a peaceful manner. And this was super important to Spartacus. He wanted to open up supply lines so that he could count on getting the things he needed for his army without having to plunder all the time. Because if his people were going to have a chance at creating a life for themselves, they had to be seen as people, and they had to be respected by the Romans. They also had to be able to trade and to forge relationships with suppliers, which means not killing everybody that they saw on sight. Baseline. They had to teach the Romans not just to fear them, but to respect them. This was no small task, and it would be impossible if they kept killing people who weren't combatants, which is why, when you look at that passage from Sallust, you see Spartacus pleading with his men not to pillage and kill indiscriminately in these towns that they're taking. And look, if you're gonna pillage, try to keep the word from getting out so people don't think we're just psycho murderers. He didn't want the Romans to think of them that way. He wanted the Romans to think of them as a respectable pseudo-state of people that they had to negotiate with on an equal playing field.
Yeah, and they undermine it when they are more concerned with gold than with actually equipping their army. Like what Spartacus is doing here is next level. It's saying, okay, now all of my people are going to be armed with the same weapons so that they're going to go out and have the same chance when they're taking on the Roman legions. Like it's not just going to be the hand-picked warriors who have the best stuff. Everyone is going to have good stuff.
He's also concerning himself with food, with stuff that the non-combatants need. So he's putting all of that ahead of gold and plunder and stuff like that. But not everyone who followed Spartacus agreed with these tactics. Many of his followers did not understand why they had to give up their gold and plunder and their right to plunder, and why everything had to be communal, because there are a lot of people in Spartacus's army, Thracians, Gauls, Germans, Goths, who came from warrior cultures. And in a lot of these cultures, individual warriors built up strength, status, and renown through earning their own plunder.
Absolutely, and that was hugely important to them.
They were being told that they couldn't look to their own glory. They had to look to the benefit of the many.
But the many aren't out there risking their life. The warriors are. The warriors deserve the better portions.
Yeah, it's all about who gets the hero's portion in terms of gold and bling and stuff.
Absolutely. So during that winter, Spartacus probably looked around and saw how many women, children, and other non-combatants followed him. People who just wanted a chance at freedom. He wanted to get these people out of Italy and take them over the Alps, where they could return to their own tribes in Gaul or Germania or Thrace, or just make a new start out from under the thumb of Rome. For him, the endgame wasn't taking on Rome and sacking the city. It was returning to home and freedom. At least, that's what the ancient sources tell us.
Is that what the ancient sources tell us?
Well, that's what they posit. Plutarch has a little bit of a fanboy crush on Spartacus.
And he's making some suppositions, right? We don't actually know what was in Spartacus's head. And there are a lot of things that Spartacus does in the ancient sources that are mysterious. We don't know why he made these choices.
We don't know Spartacus's endgame. We don't even know what his real name is, so how could we possibly know what his endgame was? If Spartacus was a Thracian and if he was a Magi, the Magi were nomadic. So they didn't have one homeland. They tended to follow their strong leader who led them to different places. And to me, this makes sense as to how Spartacus viewed the world, because he's looking at the people around him and he's saying, okay, I guess I've managed to become their tribal leader and they're all looking after me to give them a place of safety. Because as we talked about when we talked about Thracians, the land in Thrace was hotly fought over all of the time. Everyone wanted the rich minerals you could get in Thrace, and you had to be a strong warrior to keep your land, your people together. If Spartacus came from the Magi, then it kind of makes sense that that would be his outlook. I need to keep all of my people together and get them to the next place of safety. But anyway, I want to get back to Spartacus's generals because they didn't see things the same way he did. Crixus and the Gallic forces wanted to kill as many Romans as possible, potentially. To them, it was more honorable to die in battle, taking on a foe who had wrought so much pain and degradation on their people, than it was to try to escape back to their homelands.
Yet again, this is another supposition. But we are making this educated guess based on what we know about the Gauls and the Celts and their outlook.
And we're also making this based on the idea that they were upset about not being able to have their gold in their hero's portion. This would have mattered to them.
So the Germanic forces, co-commanded by Castus and Gannicus, probably felt the same way as the Gauls. We're just guessing, but it seems likely. We can guess that they were spoiling for a good fight, and after a winter of regrouping and planning, these two generals, Gannicus and Castus, were at a crossroads. They could either follow Spartacus's leadership, which we're guessing that leadership cautioned against fighting Rome outright, or they could follow Crixus and march into war. It's at this point, at the beginning of 72 BC, that Spartacus's army splintered. Crixus refused to go over the Alps. His Gallic force of 3,000 to 30,000 men, I've seen both of those numbers in different sources, I don't know, were proud warriors, strong fighters whose loss would have hurt Spartacus badly. And this is a historical mystery. Historians don't know why Crixus split off from Spartacus. We're making the supposition that Spartacus wanted to keep everyone safe and get over the Alps and out of Italy, whereas Crixus wanted to fight on for glory and kill as many Romans as possible. That's a supposition that some historians make. There are other possibilities for why Crixus broke off.
Oh, there are, and we're going to talk about that in a little while.
Yeah, we'll get to it. So anyway, at this point, Crixus has splintered off from Spartacus, taking a large contingent of his army, the Gallic forces, with him, which really would have hurt Spartacus. Nevertheless, Spartacus decided to head north to make for the Alps without Crixus. And we're assuming that he wanted to get his people over the mountains as soon as it was passable, and while Rome was still distracted with the wars in Spain and Pontus, if Spartacus wanted to get his people out of Italy, it was now or never. So the ancient sources are unclear about a lot of things, and one of the things that they're unclear about is what Gannicus, Castus, and their German followers decided to do around this time. But we think it's likely they either decided to follow Spartacus and got separated, or maybe waffled and flailed about who to follow and then decided to maybe go off on their own, based on what happens in the quote we're about to read you. Or maybe they just got separated from Spartacus in the upcoming battle. We don't know. It's a little unclear.
Yeah, they could have also been Spartacus's rear guard. We just don't know.
Yeah, they could have been tactically behind, coming up with the rear and protecting the baggage lines and the non-combatants who are moving slowly. There's a lot we don't know. But either way, what we're about to tell you is a story in which the Germanic forces, led by Gannicus and Castus, got separated from Spartacus.
So the Senate, meanwhile, was horrified about what happened in Thurii, and they decided to get serious about this Spartacus situation that they still won't call a war. According to Plutarch, quote, "The situation had become dangerous enough to inspire real fear, and as a result, both consuls were sent out to deal with what was considered a major war and a most difficult one to fight. One of the consuls, Gellius, fell suddenly upon and entirely destroyed the German contingent of Spartacus's troops, who, in their insolent self-confidence, had marched off on their own and lost contact with the rest. But when Lentulus, the other consul, had surrounded the enemy with large forces, Spartacus turned the attack, joined battle, defeated the generals of Lentulus, and captured all their equipment."
There's definitely a strong through line of Spartacus taking your stuff.
Let's get back to Plutarch. Spartacus then pushed on towards the Alps and was confronted by Cassius, the governor of Cisalpine Gaul, with an army of 10,000 men. In the battle that followed, Cassius was defeated, and after losing many of his men, only just managed to escape with his own life.
So let's break this down for a second. Crixus and Spartacus separated. Crixus is down in the south of Italy now. Spartacus and the Germanic troops marched north to the Alps, and somehow Spartacus and the Germans, led by Castus and Gannicus, got separated, and then the Roman consul Gellius wiped them out. Both Gannicus and Castus survived this battle, by the way. Meanwhile, the other consul, Lentulus, attacked Spartacus's main force, and Spartacus was able to turn the tide of battle, defeat Lentulus, and capture his equipment. And we don't know how many losses Spartacus suffered here, but we do know that he was victorious. So next, as Spartacus and his remaining followers moved north towards the Alps, the governor of Cisalpine Gaul joined the fray. And before we started researching Spartacus, We always kind of wondered why he didn't just march over the Alps as he had originally planned, and this is a big historical mystery. Historians don't know. Like, this is one of the things Spartacus does in the ancient sources that baffles historians. Like, why did he get so close to the Alps and then turn around? We don't know. But this might have been a reason.
Yeah, Spartacus had lost a lot of his fighting troops by now. How many, we're not totally sure, but his Germans were just wiped out, and the Gauls had defected with Crixus. His army would be down to shepherds, non-combatants, and whoever else was following him. And it's possible there were more battles waiting for him in the Alps, either more Roman legions or unfriendly tribes. And the Alps crossing would not have been easy. We're talking late winter, early spring here. There would have been armed resistance, and the terrain was massively difficult. Probably places were still impassable. The first Roman road through the Alps, the Via Claudia Augusta, was constructed 57 years after the Spartacus rebellion. There was no easy way through, and the region would have been populated with tribes, some friendly, but others not so friendly, with his army's strength depleted. Spartacus may have felt that the Alps were a no-go zone after this. But we don't know because nobody actually knows. But we're going to tell you another story that might have something to do with the decision Spartacus made.
So while Spartacus was moving north, Crixus and his forces were raiding the Italian countryside. They had stayed in southern Italy, and we think that they had their eyes fixed on sacking Rome. But Crixus was not the tactician that Spartacus was, and his army, while filled with strong warriors, was no match for the Roman army without Spartacus's tactical mind. And I feel like here is a good place to mention that one historical theory is that Crixus left Spartacus because his goals were different than Spartacus's goals, and he just wanted to kick Roman ass while Spartacus wanted to go over the Alps and bring his people to freedom. Or...
and this is the big or. This might have been a strategic split that Spartacus and Crixus agreed on together. Because here's the thing. Spartacus carried the bulk of the non-combatants and people who weren't likely able to defend themselves that he was trying to get across the Alps. And Crixus had these warriors. And it's possible that Crixus and his army of Gauls, of strong, fighting, honor-bound people, were the ruse to let Spartacus's army escape.
Their goal might have been to draw Roman fire so Spartacus could take the non-combatants out of Italy.
That's the idea that I absolutely love. It's why it's in the cold open, but we don't know.
We don't know why anyone did anything here. All we have is what they did. So Crixus at this point is in the Roman countryside, raiding and pillaging and kicking up trouble. And the Romans sent troops after Crixus and defeated him at Mount Gargano, which sounds like Mount Gargamel, but it's not. It's Mount Gargano. The Romans sent troops after Crixus, and they defeated him at Mount Gargano, not Gargamel, Gargano, which was about 226 miles east of Rome, which is on the other side of the peninsula. It's not that close. Crixus, gladiator, general, rebel, and brother-in-arms of Spartacus, died in battle in the shadow of the mountain. Spartacus heard the news of Crixus's defeat just as he was realizing the path through the Alps was shut to his army, we're assuming. And Appian tells us that, quote, in the aftermath, they retreated in confusion, while Spartacus first sacrificing 300 Roman prisoners to Crixus.
So this sounds like a throwaway fact, but actually it's not.
Yeah, Appian just kind of tosses it out there, and it's kind of confusing.
He does. You're like, what did I just read? But what Appian is telling us is that Spartacus threw funerary games for Crixus that involved the sacrifice of 300 Roman prisoners. We don't know exactly who these prisoners would have been, but it's likely many of them were Roman soldiers, possibly from Cassius's defeated army, and possibly high-ranking soldiers. Spartacus was a Thracian, and as we discussed in Thracian's Shoot the Messenger and Heart of Ares, as well as How to Train Your Gladiator, funerary rites were incredibly important to Thracians. They were also important to Gauls. In How to Train Your Gladiator, we even put on our tinfoil hats and posited that maybe Thracians were the first people to throw gladiatorial-style funerary games for their dead in the Mediterranean. It's probably wrong, but we enjoyed it while we said it. So, Spartacus and Crixus were gladiators, men who were forced to fight for the honor of dead Romans. In the Spartacus War, Barry Strauss explains that the 300 Roman prisoners sacrificed to Crixus's memory were likely forced to enact a crude form of gladiatorial combat. This time, the Romans entered the homemade arena for the honor and amusement of the gladiators and ex-slaves. This time, it was Roman blood that was to be spilt in the honor of the gods of Thrace, of Gaul, of Syria, of northern Africa, of Germania.
After the funeral games, something had to have changed in Spartacus. Suddenly, he didn't want to take his people to safety. Now he was determined to march south. According to Appian, quote, Spartacus made for Rome with 120 foot soldiers who may have actually been non-combatants, I don't know, after burning the useless equipment and putting all the prisoners to death and slaughtering the draft animals to free himself of all encumbrances. And although a large number of deserters approached him, he refused to accept any of them. This time, Spartacus meant business. When news of these gladiatorial games that Spartacus threw for Crixus reached the Roman Senate, they were furious. Spartacus had once again made a mockery of their generals. He had thrown his own gladiatorial games for the amusement of slaves, shepherds, women, and brigands. He had forced Roman soldiers to fight against each other and denied them a noble death.
This was more than a case of honor being at stake. This was more than an unruly rebellion. This was an all-out war on the Italian peninsula. And it was a war they were losing, because now Spartacus was marching straight toward their city with vengeance on his mind. But Pompey and Metellus still weren't back from their campaigns in Spain, and the Senate had used up all their other generals with military experience. They now had little choice but to turn to a man whose resources were almost limitless, a man who reeked of new money, a man who would do anything to make a name for himself, including put down a slave revolt. That man was Marcus Licinius Crassus.
Nobody asked for more Crassus, Jen.
God, you're getting a whole nother episode that's just going to be about Crassus and Spartacus. I'm sorry. So that's it for this week. We will see you guys in 2 weeks when we continue and conclude the epic story of Spartacus. Nobody asked for more Crassus, and I'm sorry, he's going to appear in the next episode. He's a young, fierce Crassus. He's probably in his 40s at this point in time, with a name to make for himself. Also, we just want to smack him.
Nobody asked for more Crassus, but next episode, we're going to be serving up some more Crassus, so get ready.
So if you miss us in the meantime, please visit us on social. We are at Ancient Histfan on Twitter, at Ancient History Fangirl on Facebook and Instagram. Say hello to us.
And also check out our Patreon. For as little as $2 a month, although we definitely appreciate it if you want to pledge more, you get access to some exclusive episodes. We've got a whole bunch of minisodes up on our Patreon.
Yeah, we probably will have about 13 episodes up there by now, depending on when this drops. And they are great episodes. There's also a video of us, if you ever wanted to see our faces, talking at the Intelligent Speech Conference.
You can see our faces. That is a fact.
But yes, so for as little as $2, you can become a patron. You can get access to topics ranging from that time Pompey decided to clear up the Mediterranean pirate problem in just a month, or the Pirate Queen Tuda.
There's a lot of pirate-themed episodes. There's also the Yule Cat, which is one of my favorites. There's Julius Caesar commenting on various movies.
He does. Julius Caesar has opinions. He also comments on the movie of Spartacus, the 1960s one. It's a great listen. And we always bring new content to our patrons once a month. If you want to hear us more than once every 2 weeks, then join our Patreon.
And if you're not that into Patreon, but you'd still like to help, check out our website. So you can go to ancienthistoryfangirl.com, where we have a Ko-Fi account, which is a website where you can just make a donation on a one-time basis to help us keep the lights on over here. Or you could check out our merch. We also have a link to that on our website, and we've got some awesome merch. And if you are not able to support us financially, which we totally understand, it's, totally understandable, give us a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. That is free, and we deeply appreciate it.
Yeah, and if you don't do ratings and reviews, shout us out to your friends and anyone else you think might be interested in the wild and wacky and fascinating stories from the ancient world. Thank you all for listening. We couldn't do this without you.
Hello everyone, Takuya here.
And I'm Gabby.
And we are the hosts of History of Everything, a podcast which you can probably guess by the name is, it's about everything. Do you want to know why people thought potatoes were evil and would give you syphilis? Are you curious about all the stories of the terrible and stupid ways that people have kicked the bucket over the years? Do you want to hear tales about all of the different badasses of history and the lives that they had brought to life? Well, if so, then look no further. History of Everything is just the right podcast for you. It's available on Spotify, Pandora, and anywhere else that you get your podcast from. Join us for some fun and just see how weird and wacky history can be.